It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions.
Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Wednesday, August 6th, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. An important follow-up to yesterday's show on a few focus points that I think are very important. Today will likely be shorter than what most usual TLAV followers are used to, but maybe long for those that are new today. But it'll be shorter than a usual show today, but focused on some important points that I think are very relevant. Interestingly, I only say that because I usually put this in the front. I'm putting the follow-ups that I want to show you in regard to the disaster relief post that has now been deleted, which I find really interesting. But in the context of news, it's not as important as stuff we'll start with. But I'm going to go over those in the latter half, which won't be as long as usual, as well as a document or an article that was going around that has now been addressed already in regard to the Constitution post on the US Gov website that was basically removed all the sections around habeas corpus, and which they say was a glitch. It's now back, but I just find that really interesting, and we'll discuss a few points around that I think are obviously relevant. But to start, we're going to talk about what appears to be really good news. Kennedy cancels nearly $500 million in mRNA vaccine contracts. Now, I'm going to get into what I think about that and what we already talked about, not jumping the gun until we see actual action begin to happen, not just announcements. And as far as I can tell, that's where we are at the moment. Even if actual, HHS handing down cancellations, until I see these things stop being produced, I'm not going to jump the gun, regardless of the side. But I think this is really good news, and I get the sense this is where it's going to go. But I'll, as usual, give you my objective perspective on why that may be, and overlap this with Stargate and all the different things that are seemingly still going on. We're going to talk about, in regard to an interesting an event or an incident that took place in regard to an IDF member in the United States and the interesting conversation around that after he was attacked and somebody spray painted death to the IDF, and how that's being, discussed by our government, and then overlapping that with the points, kind of a continuation of yesterday's point or many other shows in the past around infiltration of this government. And we're going to talk about a really interesting point that I'm really, because today will be shorter, I have plans to go into some depth around a couple of these different topics that I have been saying I have done around, for example, Prospera, which is one of these sort of, Freedom City. What's the other term they use? It's, like some libertarian freedom cities they're called. It's just not. I've gone over it very clearly, and I'm even the freedom city idea is pretty obviously not the way it's being presented. But we're going to go over this in kind of look at these two stories alongside each other. And that is the idea of the Freedom City point, but what just went around today, yesterday, around, and really before this, it's been brought up before, but right now it's getting focused on federalizing the Washington, D.C. and what that means, and whether or not that is sort of just a narrative around this to justify where this may be going. And these are all hypotheticals, but I want to go over what is happening and go over what this means and where this seems to be going and why this is important and all the people that seem to be interconnected on all these different points. And weirdly enough, this story starts with none other than Big Balls was his name, the guy that worked for Doge, who ended up being in Washington, D.C. and got beat up. And now Elon Musk and the rest are pointing to that as the reason this needs to happen. I just find this really hard to, seems highly unlikely, but we'll go through it all. Let's start today with this important point that I really do think is good news. And I do oops, I forgot to do that. Just for the podcast, reorganizing my window here, get it right size. But my point is that this is good news regardless, right? So if this is effort to shift us to a new direction, or if mRNA vaccines are not necessarily what they're focused on right now, it is still a positive thing to see this, because there's plenty of people out there, as assuming this goes the way it should and the way I think it will, there's plenty of people out there, people that support RFK, support Donald Trump, who still think that these things are helping people. And, in fact, Now let's read the article first. I'm going to play a clip from Donald Trump that just came out that I think is relevant, but or maybe, you know what, let's watch it first and then we'll watch it again afterward and kind of think about what it means. But this is Donald Trump recently asked about this. And so Kennedy spoke up and said this, we're going to be canceled. So Donald Trump asked about this in a moment of really finally an actual question from these people asking why. That's, basically not just this point, but the larger picture of how Trump's stance is not completely contradictory to what all of his base says. Wow. What a real question that could have been asked every day for the last 5 years, but finally gets asked. And the way he responds is very telling. And then we'll go through what this is and where I see this going and my thoughts on why it might be not exactly what we may hope it is. But just that point alone about Donald Trump's stance on this seems to be very strange. And even then in this clip, he makes it clear that warp speed and these shots were a godsend, amazing. And I don't know how that makes sense even in this conversation. We'll come back to this point.
Driving force behind Operation Warp Speed, these mRNA vaccines that are the gold standard.
Right.
Now your health secretary is pulling back all the funding for research. He's saying that the risks outweigh the benefits, which puts him at odds with
Research
the
on
entire
what?
medical community and with you. What is going on?
Before he answers, that's it. As obviously that could have been asked so many times. What you keep saying about these being amazing has been contradicted by, every other part of your entire RFK Jr. and your entire base, and everything. And he keeps doubling down on this, keeps saying that they're saving lives and it's amazing. And RFK come in saying these things were really dangerous and there's no mRNA in general. And then that's why we thought, okay, wait, Stargate, mRNA platform, self-amplifying bird flu shots, another platform on top, all of these different things. And that's the Stargate was one. There was also the all the different points we've gone over. There's plenty of them. And it just didn't make much sense. And so a lot of us were confused. Now, in a thought of hopefulness and positivity, not that I necessarily think it's where it's going, but we should consider it. Maybe this just is what people have been hoping for. Maybe this is RFK Jr. doing what he said he was going to do and that he has influence over Trump and we're going to finally see it start going. I don't believe that's what's happening, but every single one of us should be going, please, please. I hope that's what's happening because people out there that want to don't want anything good to happen because they don't want to be happy with Trump. That's I think the minority, honestly, in the conversation, but there's too many of them out there on left and right. And so we should really be hoping for that. As much as I don't believe these people are being honest with us about a lot of things, it's still something we should hope for, that I'm wrong, that these things carry out and they cancel all this. And it was all one big 14 million D chess move to trick the other side. I certainly hope so. But my point being is that this is an indication of that maybe going in that direction. All the other points we keep seeing, I just don't think are what they claim. The gain of function, and really, I'll go over this couple more points as we go forward, but there's been a lot of deliberate, on the surface, deliberate manipulations. Gain of function was not ended. They all pretended they did, and they just didn't do that. And so they lied to you. So if this was the way it was going, why would that be necessary, right? Or the lies about any number of other things that are sort of being repackaged when it's not really what they are, which I'll go to some other points in a moment. Let's keep watching this.
Research on what?
Into risks outweigh the benefits, which puts him at odds with
Research
the
on
entire
what?
medical community and with you. What is going on?
Research on what?
Into mRNA vaccines.
Well, we're going to look at that. We're talking about it, and they're doing a very good job. And,
we're going to look at it. Doesn't feel like a ringing endorsement. It sounds sort of like, well, Tulsi Gabbard said this. I don't care what she has to say. That's the feeling, not it's been discussed and we canceled it, but well, we're going to look at that. We're going to discuss that. And I also find this weird thing he keeps doing where he keeps acting like he has no idea what's going on in his own administration, what that's going on. We'll get to that about Epstein, that he didn't know that Ghislaine was moved, which people are simply saying that's just flatly not true. And that there's not even, anyway, we'll get to that in a second. But this is, how do we really want to pretend that he didn't know about a $500 million cancellation of massive, that's business. And he didn't know about that he doesn't have influence on that? No, it's not. It's certainly in the realm of possibility that he wouldn't be, I guess, it's even saying that seems unlikely, but that he wouldn't be included in something like this. It's possible. But I just think it's interesting that even the response seemed like he just about what? Oh yeah, and jump right into it. My impression is that he knew exactly what they were going with that, but he wanted to give the impression that I'm not really the one. I'm just, they're under me, and I'm just, it's like a buffer of not involved, so he doesn't get criminally accountable. It's kind of the way I feel about it, but you can decide. But note that action. He does it a lot. like with Marco Rubio, for example, in USAID. It was like, that's his thing, and he's the one. Maybe worried there, because there were a lot of legal challenges around the way they did that, and maybe still coming around.
That is, we're talking about it, and they're doing a very good job. And, that is a past. With Operation Warp Speed,
that is, he said a past. So, I mean, the point is that's in the past. He says it again in a second. But what's in the past? Warp speed? You're right. So is he implying that mRNA is a thing of the past? I certainly hope so. But, there's indications all over the place that's not really the direction. I mean, $500 billion Stargate program doesn't just get tossed aside, especially with all, I mean, I certainly hope it does, but with Oracle and OpenAI and SoftBank and all the Israel infiltration around all of those things, that's just, that's true, but that's how I add that because I think that's important. But doesn't that, I mean, that's an AI mRNA platform around cancer is the way they framed it. But so you're just going to stop all, I mean, that's just seems hard to believe, but I hope so.
You're Republican or Democrat, considered one of the most incredible things.
Right. Okay, I'm going to let the rest of it play. Those are the points I want to get on the opening, but listen to what he says, because I think the fact that he still praises this is hard to stomach.
Good job. And, that is a past. With Operation Warp Speed was, whether you're Republican or Democrat, considered one of the most incredible things ever done in this country. The efficiency, the way it was done, the distribution, everything about it has been amazing.
Sure.
But, that was now a long time ago. And we're on to other things. But we are speaking about it. We have meetings about it tomorrow at 12 o'clock, and we'll determine. We're looking for other answers to other problems, to other sicknesses and diseases. And I think we're doing really well. Yes, ma'am. Please.
Yeah. Non-answer, right? That's the typical way, but that's not him. It's politicians. That's what they do. Doing great things, and we're on the way. We'll talk about it and we'll get there. And, there's no real definitive answer about his contradiction to what he says, right? I mean, and so one of the things, what he says there.
But, that was...
this is why I always stop it when I'm listening, because I forget.
Now a long time ago. And
so, a long time ago. It really obviously wasn't, not in the context of other than maybe the 24-hour news cycle that makes everybody think yesterday was infinite time ago. But I think what's happening is I think he's so used to being able to just suggest what people should think about a thing, and they all do. Right. And so in this case, it's sort of like, oh, Epstein, you're still talking about Epstein. That is insane that he even did that, knowing that everyone knows what largely his supporters thought. So that's him trying to coordinate, trying to manipulate you into going away from what you believe in, because he said, oh, I'm not supposed to think that. Okay. Didn't work. Right. So now they're trying to do other things. Same thing here. Oh, that's old news. We're going a different direction, which is worry. What I worry about is something I mentioned a few times already, but really now is when it's starting to look like that's what might happen, or I worry about, is that it's not necessarily about the injections anymore. That whether it ever really was, guys, I honestly think a large part of what it is, as we can see the direction now, was about wherever this technocratic, AI-driven whatever is building into, and the genetic overlap. Like we talked about the bio-digital convergence. We've talked about the idea of patenting life. All of these things have to do with what they gained right there. Yesterday, we talked about Illumina Inc., an Israeli overlap company. We actually, by the way, mentioned Microsoft on top of that. Just today, there's a story about Microsoft overlapping with Israel in a data issue. That's exactly what I talked about yesterday. The point, though, is that you can see how all of these things, these moving parts around COVID-19, the genomic information, the surveillance, the everything, it overlaps with not just the AI part, not just technocracy, but how those things intertwine with the biological direction. Like in regard to the bio-digital convergence, or the idea of the fifth industrial revolution, which he tells you, Klaus Schwab and every one of the rest of them, that when those things would happen. And they tell you that's where we are. Now, think about all that, in the idea that, so when they go, we're going to go away from mRNA, and again, hypothetically right now, it hasn't technically happened yet, but that we will be talking about, what other aspects are involved in this. And he said alternative. Now, does that mean not mRNA? Or does that just mean no longer mRNA injections? It's worth considering, because I thought about that a while ago, that this might have been a means to an end, and it was about something, experimentation, about whatever else, and that the real action was not just about an injection, but whatever the means is to progress the agenda, the experiments, the technology. And that doesn't have to be this one field. And that clearly, what's the old metaphor that, you can was it shear a sheep once? I forget how that goes. But the point being is, you can do something once or you can, go all the way and, like essentially, if I forget the term for it though, but if you go too far, you can, you can let's just make it, you can slaughter it once, but you can shear it many times. I don't think it's the term, but the point is you get the logic of it is that I think that's what they did with that narrative is they went way too far and people are like, no way, not even most Democrats at this point are like very concerned about at least that direction as far as I can see. So finishing, and that was it. We finished it already. So the point is, he is kind of waffling about, we'll talk about it. Doesn't seem to be a ringing endorsement of where this is going. And also the fact that that might not be the only thing they're going for. And there's also currently things that I think aren't being canceled around this area, but we'll find out as this goes forward. So here is the article from New York Times. This came out today, or excuse me, yesterday. That's crazy. I thought that's the 6th. Kennedy cancels nearly $500 million in mRNA vaccine contracts. Now, in this is riddled with all sorts of pro-COVID-19 vaccine, lockdown. Everything we did was great, which, by the way, seems to be kind of what Trump is saying, but not, he'll not say lockdowns were good, but clearly everything around the parts he was involved in the vaccine side of it, he's involved in everything. But RFK Jr. has canceled nearly $500 million in grants and contracts for developing mRNA vaccines. Not just everything mRNA, overlap, genetic, and if we're talking about alternative stuff, remember, there's all sorts of intertwining problems with that on the alternative path too, or the idea of genetic treatments. Like that's what this ultimately was, genetic editing, not really injection. So that right there could be a deviation. But it says the Department of Health and Human Services announced this, and this was announced yesterday. It is the latest blow to research on this technology, as they frame it. In May, the Department of Health and Human Services revoked a nearly $600 million contract to Moderna, which we talked about. But remember, that was that carried over. Now, it could just be something they just fell by the wayside, but that was allowed to go quite far until, as they say, where was it? In May, they finally did pull back that money. But as we highlighted, there was progress. I mean, that was going. That had been awarded just before they took over from Biden, and then it carried through. And then we were like, well, Stargate platform, self-amplifying shot. So it's kind of makes sense. And then they pulled that one. I said, okay, well, that's good. But what about all the others? It kind of doesn't feel like that makes sense. But so then it goes on to say, continuing, the health department said in its release that the cancellations affected 22 projects managed by BARDA. So I'd love to see what those are. As my point, guys, is from my research so far. And as always, let me know if I'm missing something. But from my research, it doesn't appear anything is actually, this has been an announcement made. There's been movement probably in the background paperwork side of this, but I haven't seen anything official either posted or actually in action. And trust me, I'll be one of the first to tell you because I really hope this is what's going on. But when the 22 projects, my point is we'll get to find out what those may be. And does that apply to Stargate? Does it apply to all the things they're all, alternatively or rather tangentially working on? Mr. Kennedy has been sharply critical of the technology, which he has, up until basically getting into Trump's administration, and then waffled about it in places where he was really strong before, or endorsed the team that said these things were safe and effective, both from the FDA and the EPA, everywhere. All the different comments. Even people that weren't necessarily involved in it were coming out and saying, things that, there's a lot of weirdness over here, by the way, like with the EPA overlap with what they were doing with Zeldin. There's so many weird things going on that don't seem to align with what we think their jobs are. Which, that speaks to things we've talked about a lot in the past, that their jobs are just whatever they are to keep you in line. But he's been very critical for a very long time. Same with the MMR shot. And also then turned and said that one was okay. There's something going on here. I think we all knows that. In a video posted on social media on Tuesday, he claimed incorrectly, New York Times claims, that mRNA vaccines do not protect against respiratory illness, like COVID and the flu. He's right. That they drive viruses to evolve, some people will have an issue with that, and that a single mutation in a virus renders the vaccine ineffective. Now, regardless of the side, an important conversation, my point is really about when we're talking about the respiratory issue, right? The idea was, based on the logic from before, not necessarily buying all of the narrative around the idea of these things, but the idea that I think it was Dr. Bhakti who made it clear that you can't vaccinate in the shoulder for a respiratory illness. Even Fauci made similar points, and yet they all seemingly went forward with this because we were being tested on it. I think that's pretty obvious at this point. So when he says that, he's right. And all of the peer-reviewed science, or rather, let's be clear, the large majority of that science does also back that up. Now, it's not like a headline that says they don't work for respiratory viruses, but if you read the actual data and talk to the experts, that's what these things are clearly showing you. And look at what we went through. Look at the outcome, guys. It's pretty obvious. And Trump still sides with these things. And it says that they drive viruses to evolve and that the single mutation could change that. But arguably, that's not necessarily different than the other whole cell versions, as far as I understand it. There still can be mutations. These things can still happen. The mRNA thing arguably does drive that faster. There are many different points. Faster is probably not the right word. More, I guess that works. Rapid, like you see more manipulation happening. But so my point, though, is that these things were called out. We all knew them. And now finally they're stopping them. But ultimately now they're attacking him for the things that we all seem to have accepted. So I guess I'm wondering where the New York Times and the kind of the corporate coverage of this is going. I just don't see how we go back to the same direction. It's kind of what I'm getting at. I just don't. I feel like this might be like an engineered sort of pullback from this direction in hopes that we give them a win for it and ultimately that we miss the next step. Always consider that. Now it says the health department said it will forever or favor other types of shots over those using mRNA. So that's also interesting. And it says like whole cell vaccines, which I find super interesting. Where's all the Maha people out there that RFK has called out whole cell vaccines many different times. And so now we're stepping back away from mRNA. Good news if that actually happens. But then at least in one case, pointing to whole cell vaccines, right? And so these are the ones we've seen in the past that can have potential issues with people actually getting infected with all sorts of different things. And so he's also called these things out. I just find it interesting. But on top of that, there's plenty of people, especially in Maha and conservative movements, that don't want any vaccines, that were convinced he was going to go, no, they're all bad, which in many cases, he's never, ever been every single one is bad, but he's had plenty of criticisms about just the general way they're made. And the same kind of point I've made in the past, that not that I know for sure every single thing, but that if they're all like, if they were responsible for the COVID injections and it's the same people who are blindly rubber stamping the other ones, then we should be looking at all of this. But here we are going back into the same old practice. Now it says that technology is more than 100 years old. The United States has not used a whole cell vaccine for whooping cough since 1990s. He particularly called it out around whooping cough because it was potent but harsh, often setting off high fevers and seizures. Like most of them, to be honest, not all on the exact level of how severe they are, but the idea that this is natural to have these terrible things that happen, that's showing you there's something wrong, in my opinion. Mr. Kennedy himself assailed the leading international vaccine organization, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, for continuing to use the whole cell vaccine in low-income countries, citing it as the reason the United States was pulling funding from the organization. But at least in one direction, seems to be shifting into. Now, all super preliminary, guys. So I think we have to, we should stress caution and patience. Let's wait and see what happens here. But, call the thing. I mean, look, there's no reason we shouldn't still be calling out all the other things that we see. But I think I'm interested to see where this goes and whether or not this might actually be a positive step. But, while considering all the different ways that it could go awry. Now, the Stargate thing, I just think is really hard to decouple from this. We know this is happening. Trump was all about this. And these people are, these are very wealthy, very influential people that have put time and effort into this. Now, based on what I can find, I haven't seen any tangible results from this. Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of statements. There's been investigatory actions. There's been partnership, but we haven't seen, as far as I can tell, unless we're missing something, actual action around using this to develop some kind of drug. And so that's what I was interested by to see if this is in the mix, is that going to be canceled with this? And, and is that, or is it going to be left away? How do we see this? Will he market these as genetic editing for cancer, which is really what they are, right? So I will have to wait and see. But I just find it hard to believe that this platform for specifically mRNA AI-driven drugs is going to be removed when so much has been put into it. And this one, by the way, this is the self-amplifying bird flu shot. It seems interesting that these things would be pulled back after they started under RFK's administration, or rather Trump, but RFK being in the administration. Realize, this happened in April. So what are we to make from that? The reason I'm pointing this is because he was there. So does that mean that he wasn't making these decisions, or did he make them and now he's changing his mind? I mean, how do you make sense of that? So all of this just leaves me uncomfortable. What's actually happening here? Will it go in the right direction? I'll go back to the original point that regardless of their intent, if they actually stop mRNA in any direction, I think that's a positive outcome. All that really shows you is that by our awareness and our constant, calling them for their BS, they're ultimately forced to take steps like this that, even if it's just a steam release, a release valve to get us to stop paying attention. We caused that by calling these things out. And that's the real point of what we do here. All of us, everyone, you in the chat, keep holding their feet to the fire so they can actually, whether they want to or not, whether they are good people or not, do what is in their best interest. And right now, let's hopefully make that whatever we're calling for, like as the people of this country. Now, this again is the clip that we just played in the beginning. So as Brad Miller says, too few Americans have the balls to call Warp Speed what it is: treason. The COVID op is still killing Americans, and yet most people refuse to care. So here's Donald Trump today, or rather, I believe this was today, saying it was amazing that everyone, Democrat, Republican alike, think it was amazing. That's just not even true. There's plenty of people in Congress that will call it out, but really not do anything about it, because I think that's the biggest problem. But what do you guys think? Where is this going to go? And I think we should put a pin in this until we see more action, but get ready for the waterfall of people coming out and telling you this just changed the world, right? Already changed, which I'm one to point out. This is a very great step, at least even the nod toward it. But as always, we get people that jump the gun. I'll make even the point about, like, I actually took it off today because we don't have as much time. The Obama thing, the alleged grand jury, which it wouldn't surprise me if they go forward with something. But it's just been announced by the corporate media and Bondi that nothing has actually, as far as I can tell, from either the DOJ or anywhere else, actually started or happened. Like, I shouldn't say it like that, because they could be doing things, but there's no DOJ post about it. So as far as we're concerned, it's simply been floated. And I don't know why anybody out there would keep, there's people that I usually point to who keep reiterating as of today that it has been convened, it is going on, and is convened. Well, maybe, it wouldn't be surprising, but it hasn't technically happened yet. And how often have we seen things that state and then something shifts and that we wanted to, but now we can't, whatever. It's just, the point is how often they don't actually come to pass. And weirdly, it overlaps, we'll get to in a minute, about the Epstein thing. I find this really strange right now that I mentioned this in yesterday's show, so they're calling for the grand jury around Obama, Russiagate, which, by the way, again, I think all of them should be in jail, not just the left or the right, but in the context of Russiagate, yes, they committed crimes, but plenty of them committed far more serious war crimes all over the world, and all of them should be in prison. But also, you've got the Epstein point, where they're now being subpoenaed. Weirdly, like almost the exact same list. In that case, just Democrats, though. We're only subpoenaing the Democrats around Epstein, but they keep talking about it like, here is a grand jury around Russiagate, and now they're being subpoenaed. But for Epstein, there's something weird about those are being mashed together, but maybe I'm just reading it wrong. You tell me what you think. So let's go to the next point on this. Now, this is important, I think, because this overlaps with, even what we just talked about, by the way. There's plenty of ways to overlap that if you, not just looking for, but provable connections to that agenda with exactly what we're going to get into now. But this first is just about the interesting framing of this. This is from the New York Post. American who served in IDF targeted in hateful anti-Semitic attack. Now, yeah, could it have been motivated by racism? Sure. Could it have been motivated by the fact that these people watching IDF commit genocide in the world made them upset? Sure, that too. Maybe both. The fact that everyone's just blindly assuming that it was about the fact that they were Jewish. It seems insane to me that we're acting like this still makes sense. And the same thing I said before. If this is the equivalent of somebody in the midst of the Nazi party committing a genocide, going up and spray painting "Death to Nazis" on the front street out front one of their homes, and then getting upset about that. Now, yeah, look, was there a crime committed? It should matter whether or not they're a Nazi or whether or not they're IDF. Yeah, it should matter. So if they broke into their car and set it on fire, then arrest them for that. Charge them for what would be more than vandalism, because it would be more. I forget what the term is. Charge them, put them in jail for it. But to then make this about something more and then turn it into some national event when you obviously understand that the whole world sees what they're doing. And look, it doesn't mean just because he's in the IDF, therefore he should be called guilty. That's fair to say, by the way. There are people in the IDF who have protested, but just to be objective. But look, I see it. The vast majority of them are not just going through the motions, which is also bad when you're committing a crime, but are okay with it, are happy with it, posting them. And that's not my opinion. There's a lot of the people in Israel, though, that do call this out. But my point, though, is you understand why somebody who's watching this live streamed, watching their own politicians tell you that it's okay, children starve to death, and then get upset about it. Right? I mean, it's like the simplest thing in the world. And then watching somebody come home in their IDF uniform and just being outraged about that. I'm just saying you can understand why somebody might do that. Now, this is being framed everywhere you look by American politicians as anti-Semitic and hateful. Well, didn't we just get done talking about from the Republicans that hate crimes and hate speech were really fake things? Crimes are crimes, speech is speech. I don't understand why we think this crime's more important because you think, before even knowing for sure, that they had racial intent. Even if they do, how does that change the crime? What's the crime? Violence, vandalism, or, anything, murder, then it should be those crimes. It shouldn't be murder plus because they did it for bad reasons. It's all subjective and it's used against us in every possible case. So, American who served with Israel. So to me, I find that important as well, as we're going to go through this next clip. Why in the world, in any context, it's okay for an American to go work in a foreign military? Is that okay? Can they go work in China? I don't even think Americans can go to join the British Army, but here we are where people are drifting over to a genocide committing government and working with them and then floating back into the country. No big deal. I mean, that seems wild to me. I'm not implying anything other than the fact that that should upset people. That one, it is a contradiction. Two, it's obviously a security risk in the way they're framing everything else. But he's an American. He has a right to come into this country, but he also has a right to own the actions they're committing in that genocide. Not to the point of crime, not to the point that he has to, but if somebody wants to come up and say, I think you're committing genocide, you know how crazy that gets today? People are acting like you should be put in prison for the rest of your life because you hate Jews. Did anybody even say that? You're committing a genocide gets turned into that, and that becomes the issue. So an American who served with the IDF has his car torched and had death to the IDF scrawled outside. That's the gist of it, by the way. So you tell me how anybody who is an investigator, a detective, a judge, anybody is going to go, well, must be Jews. It must be hatred. You can easily go, well, maybe that played a factor. Maybe that was the driving force, but we don't know that. Clearly, the IDF committing genocide might just be enough for people to be upset. Hateful vandals, because the New York Post is so objective these days, right? Hateful vandals targeted the IDF veterans' home in St. Louis Tuesday, according to the head of Trump administration and anti-Semitism task force. That was Leo Terrell, who, guess what, guys? Didn't find out about this through the news, didn't find out about this because Trump briefed him. He found out because the Israeli embassy called him. The Israeli government calls people in the U.S. government and goes, this just happened, do something. And guess what he did? He jumped up and he immediately posted about it and has been driving this forward ever since. Based on the fact that it's about the IDF, and you're going to turn this, he is the, what do they call him? Yeah, the head of the anti-Semitism task force, right? So the head of, you have no rights if it's about Israel in the United States task force. I don't care what you think about it. I don't care if it literally is about racism. The idea that you have an American government task force that is about stopping you from speech is just absolutely insane. But that's where we are. It's not just Trump, but it sure as hell's exploding in this administration. Graffiti scrawled on the road also accused the victim of being a murderer. Yeah, is anyone going to balk at that right now? I could scroll to the next page and show you 75 pictures of people being murdered in Gaza today and children starving to death and IDF members laughing and doing TikTok dances about it. So I'm pretty sure people are not okay. That doesn't mean everybody everywhere. I made that clear. I'm only highlighting why it's easy for people if you can understand why people might act irrationally. He says, quote, I reviewed the graphic footage of the vehicles belonging to the family and their friends. The vehicles were set on fire and destroyed. Hateful graffiti in the family's home, accused him of being a murderer and called for death to the IDF. Now, if somebody had gone and done this to a British veteran who lives in the country, or, see, the problem is it would be an American who worked in the British Army, which doesn't seem to exist. But you can just make it an American veteran. The reason I didn't say that is because that alone, that would get people riled up in its own right. But let's say somebody goes after an American veteran who came back from Iraq and said, you're a murderer, and burned his car, and rather, they didn't say it, wrote it on the street. Did death to the American military. Burned his car and said, they raped and murdered in Iraq because, they did. And we can prove that in court. It's been discussed all over the place. We don't know that look back. Horrible things, by the way. Some of the worst I've ever seen, to be honest, outside of what's going on in Israel, where commanders were literally people were ordered by their leadership to rape people in front of them. Guys, if you don't believe that, you need to look back at what happened in Iraq. The point is that if they did that to an American military person, that probably would barely make the news. Now, yes, it would cause, there'd be outrage stories about it, rightly so, because it's just, look, the point is about the crime. But you could understand why people would be outraged about it from an American exceptionalism, jingoism mindset. My point, though, is that that would not even come close to the kind of coverage this is getting. I don't know why that doesn't speak for itself. I mean, it does, actually. I shouldn't say that. I think everyone's starting to see it across left and right. But at one, I guess I should say, I wonder why up until now, it hasn't had that weight. Now, it says it wasn't immediately clear how long the victim had served with the Israeli military or exactly when he returned to the United States. Well, that's comforting, right? Who knows? He might be a spy. Who cares, though? That guy's a racist. Meanwhile, cops said they were probing the incident as a hate crime. Okay, so cops are looking into it as a possible hate crime, and yet everybody's already reporting it as an absolute hate crime, and we know it. Because objective journalism is the way to go today, right? No arrests have yet been made. This is more than vandalism. It is a hateful act of intimidation, and only the latest example of what happens when anti-Semitic and anti-Israel rhetoric are normalized. Right, because of the same thing, right? You're not allowed to go, Israel's breaking the law because you must hate Jews. That's how this works, guys, and you damn well know it. Leo Terrell says, today the Israeli embassy alerted him, to a horrific anti-Semitic attack in St. Louis. And again, this is what we don't know that yet, do we? They don't know. This has yet to be proven. American citizen who served in the IDF returned to his family home soon after he and his family were targeted. Maybe, or maybe just him. I reviewed graphic footage of vehicles. You see, the language there is meant to imply it's about the Jewish family, that these people have an agenda. It's not, it's about one of the most obvious things in the conversation today. I reviewed graphic footage of vehicles belonging to the family and their friends. The vehicles were set on fire and destroyed. Hateful graffiti outside the family's home accused him of being a murderer and called for death to the IDF. That's all. That's it. Now, again, you could just, I shouldn't say it like it's nothing, right? But my point, though, is it's not about anything other than the IDF, the military, and the fact that he works there as an American and that he's taking part in genocide. That's what's happening. I immediately contacted the FBI, he said, which is engaging the St. Louis team. Right. So apparently, until Israel reached out, this wasn't happening. Alerted Attorney General Pam Boddy's office. I spoke directly with the family so they know that the DOJ task force to combat anti-Semitism is on this. I'm outraged. Anti-Semitic violence has no place in America. Well, violence, right? That would be the point. Violence. No, violence is okay. Anti-Semitic violence is completely off limits. Not in St. Louis and not anywhere. We will pursue every avenue to bring the perpetrators to justice. If you commit anti-Semitic hate crimes, you will be caught. Now, if you do this to white people, half don't really care. We'll feign action. But yeah, you say you sneeze hard at Israel and we're going to burn your house down. That's how this feels right now. It's like just wildly over the top. And let's be clear, regardless of whether it is about actual racism or not, people who are speaking about like that, anti-Semitic people, pro-Palestine are called that. People who are coming out and saying Jewish people shouldn't exist. It's all still speech, guys. And people that say that, as I always point out, I would say they were disgusting, but I defend your right to say it because that's what real free speech looks like. Not people like this. These are fakes. Now, on the point of what the IDF are doing, let's realize the IDF, I think this is one of like 5 or 6 that I've seen. I forget. I think it's 5. We've talked about this. You tell me in the chat how many times we've shown IDF members whistleblowing about what's going on. It's been quite a few. This was, I think, one of the first I saw. IDF whistleblower admits institutional war crimes are openly being committed in Gaza. Now, you've seen this clip, but since somebody might be new, we'll play it really quickly. Now, this is just him. This is just the opening I've used. And I just want to let you listen to what he had to say. Now, this is why Americans are outraged. Because there's IDF members telling you, we're committing war crimes. You have a Green Beret who they're now being like ridiculed by Pierce Morgan and people he invites on to shout down at him about what he literally witnessed of them murdering children, or the World Food Program telling you we watch them murder kids and people in front of us. But yeah, you're all lying racists. Here's one of them in the IDF telling you that's what they did. So keep that in mind when Americans get outraged enough to do things, even commit crimes. Not rationalizing, understanding.
Do you think that you witnessed war crimes taking place?
Probably. The ground assumption is that they are Hamas. And then if you go this way, you're bound to kill people that are not.
Now, in a rare interview, one soldier tells us about the reality he says he witnessed. What kind of stuff would they say?
There are no uninvolved, only unarmed. This is something that I'm going to carry for the rest of my life.
Listen to the whole thing, unarmed are being shot, right? There's no innocent, just unarmed, which means we kill them all. That's the point, guys. Every day we have not just examples and evidence and videos, but of these people screaming that in the Knesset, of IDF members doing videos and laughing about how it's happening, or doing videos of how they execute people and then smoking a cigarette and doing a thumbs up. It's everywhere, guys. It's everywhere. And my point is that every institution of any standing has been clear about that. And yet we just get lied to by our government because, well, you can fill in the blank. Obvious, they're not acting in American interest, guys. I think that's pretty clear. Now, this is Zionism Observer, and I find this to be very relevant to this conversation and also about the overlap here. This is an advertisement to recruit U.S. mercenaries for the Gaza Health Found, the Hunger Games killing line, pretending to be a food line in Gaza. About U.S. UG Solutions LLC. My point in this is to show you that they're actively recruiting Americans to take part in this genocide. And we have every single right to be outraged about that our government allows it, that there obviously is a problem in how this is all working. And it's not just advertisements, guys. Now, I just thought there's an interesting overlap. Michael Rappaport, that clown who still exists. But it's funny because, as we talked about before, there was the time when he was getting shows canceled. He was acting like, it's only making me more popular. Doesn't seem to be working out that way. My point is that this is what they keep doing and framing it this way. Now, what do you think? Do you think people are, well, there's two possibles here in my mind. Well, first he says, my show tonight at Stardome in Alabama was canceled. I did not cancel. I would never cancel, especially since I'm already here in Birmingham, ready to perform. It was shut down because protests and threats to my support of Israel for speaking up about the hostages. It's embarrassing and sad. Point. You go on and look at his account where people are, he's framing this as anti-Semitism. That's how this conversation is spinning out. So what do you think? Do you think this is because, one, Michael Rappaport's not funny and people decided they don't want him there anymore because he's, it could go on and on and on? Or do you think this is because people are mad about him supporting a genocide? Third, do you think it's because they go, you are a Jew and we hate that? But we set it up first. We organized it. We planned it. We sold tickets. But then went, wait a minute, I didn't even know, despite you folding that in with everything you are today, but never doing that before this all started. I mean, guys, the point is obvious. Americans everywhere are outraged about this genocide, outraged about the U.S. involvement in this genocide, outraged about clowns like this telling you you're wrong for not supporting this genocide. So people went up and said, we don't want him here, and they canceled it. And all he can do is act like people hate Jews, and that's why I suck at my job. No, you just suck at your job. And people don't like you because you're acting like some kind of a child who's, he's acting like somebody who is gaining every day by watching what's happening, right? By watching children starve to death, by watching people get murdered, and acting like this is some kind of a positive shift in the world. It's sickening to me. So too with a lot of Americans. And that's the reality to me. But this is the best they can do, right? Make it all about religion and racism because Zionism has lost control of the narrative. My point, though, is just about trying to frame everything like that, when in reality, it's mostly about the fact that you're committing genocide or supporting it, like the IDF member. Now, two quick points I want to include, since we're going to get into more of Gaza and Israel in one of the next shows. Daily Drop Site News reported this. Now, this has to do with the starvation. Now, you guys, I bet you 99% of people here are already well aware that Gaza is being starved to death. Why? Because literally every possible standing position is telling you that. And all the evidence is showing you that. I mean, every single thing in this conversation, other than Israeli propagandists and governments that are controlled by them, are literally proving that to you. But it's being denied still by people in, the governments we're talking about. But Drop Site News came out and made a very clear report on this. And this is via Channel 13, Israeli media, leaked Israeli records. So this keeps happening, by the way, that Israeli media will literally prove to you what we're telling you, and your own government acts like it's not true and calls you racist. Guess what? You're anti-Semite for reporting what Israeli media is telling you the Israeli government is doing. Leaked Israeli records show government pursued starvation strategy to force Hamas surrender. You know this, though. Why? Because if you pay attention, even remotely, Ben-Gvir said it 13 times. Smotrich has made it very clear right up to this day that they're starving them because we don't want to help the terrorists. Well, that means you're starving them, first of all, which is a crime, as well as the fact that all the people that are innocent, as well as all the people that are your hostages, or rather understanding that that's just the way they would frame that. The point is that this is a major provable story that is now even further fleshed out to where Israeli media has put out records that show you that they planned to starve them to death, and yet we're still being lied to. Channel 13 has published internal Israeli document transcripts from March 2025, revealing that Israel's war cabinet knowingly restricted all aid that they claim would break Hamas. Now, whether you think that's even the reason they did it, the point is that it's not secret. Remember right in the beginning, no food, no water, no fuel. And yet we just pretend, or rather the government pretends that we don't all see that, which shows you who's driving the bus, guys. So you can watch this further. I recommend you read it and listen to it. My point is just to you to understand, which we'll go into more depth soon, that they know we see it and they still do it anyway. This same point, this is the woman we just ridiculed all over. She's the one that went on an interview on CNN just yesterday in our show and just rattled off. I mean, the level of beheaded babies, the level of either she is embarrassingly uninformed or she is lying on purpose. That's the only two things that can make sense in this. And it's horrifying. Even the guy on CNN was like taken aback. Like, are you serious right now? Are you actually arguing that no one's? And the point is that she said something that just I thought was all of it was absurd. She claimed that she's been in Gaza and seen all the locations where they're using hospitals as human shields. Oh, you mean even though journalists can't do that? I mean, how embarrassing. But see, they don't think people are this smart, but they are, and we're seeing you. But here's on Piers Morgan, Israeli hostage negotiator Gershon Baskin told Piers Morgan that his government is committing war crimes in Gaza. And Hamas told him twice in writing that they will release the hostages and a commitment to end the war in August last year. How many more things do we need to see? This is a guy who literally works for Israel who's telling you that. And yet this American woman's trying to lie to you about what she was told to lie about. It is just embarrassing to watch right now. So the real question continues to be, what is going to be the breaking point here? Right? What will stop the government who knows you see they're lying to you from lying? That's going to take action on our part, isn't it? It's going to take us doing something. Now, I'm never advocating for violence, but it's pretty obvious that they look around, as I've said many times before, and think, okay, well, they're yelling at us, but they're not doing anything. So if we just don't respond. Now, Epstein was a little different. I think that got some momentum. But I think they just begin to recognize if we just do nothing, it will drift away. And they think, everyone in this country has been trained to look to somebody else to solve their problems. And that's how this is right now. But here's another example. Every which way you have evidence showing you this.
I'm born here. My wife was born here. I'm not anti-Israel, but my government is committing war crimes in Gaza. And the arguments that were presented by Brooke belong in the garbage bin of history.
That's her. I mean, she's doing this humiliation ritual by going on these shows, and she just, literally the level of going beheaded babies. And, all the different arguments that were made there, I could go down the list of, the calendar and the fake CD-ROM. The point is that that's the level of the narrative she's giving. And anyone with even the smallest amount of insight, even on places like CNN, are like, come on, we've evolved like an entire year beyond those fake claims. And now they have new fake claims, but she's back there in the beginning. And I think that's just wild. But somebody's putting her to it, guys. Clearly, she's making the rounds.
It's an intellectual insult, the kind of things that we heard here that insinuate that there's no such thing as a Palestinian people when there are 7 million Palestinians living between the river and the sea. Mm-hmm. How can you deny the existence of a people, 7 million people who call themselves, excuse me, let me talk. What Israel is doing should not be tolerated by the Israeli public, nor by anyone in the entire world. This war has to end. Mustafa Barghouti was 100% right that Hamas has given in writing, in English and in Arabic. I received from them in August of last year a commitment to end the war and return all the hostages. And then there was more than 100 hostages that they were holding. But they demand an end to the war. They demand that Israel withdraw from Gaza. They demand a release of Palestinian prisoners. And they demand that humanitarian aid go into Gaza. They also added in writing, twice I've received from them in Arabic, that Hamas will not govern Gaza. Now the big...
Right. And guess what? You know all this because you watch this show and plenty of others in the IMA and other, independent media that actually care about the truth. Think about that, though. You knew this if you watched us for the first week of this conversation, at least some parts of that. The reality of the lies about what Gaza is, the lies about the occupation, the lies in regard to it still is, right? I mean, it's just, this. Which, we're demonstrating our value as usual, right? The fact that you were very immersed in this well before they started, and I'm glad, though, people like this are finding the courage to get out there. Not him necessarily. I believe he's been screaming this the whole time, but plenty of others out there that are finally starting to point to this stuff. You know, I mean, like I said, even actually, I'll wait to get to that about the aid. We saw Kevin Sorbo go like, what? I can't believe you're demanding that they have to support Israel to get aid. And it's just going like, gosh, how is this stuff not known by everybody? Because of the world we live in, you know, algorithmically controlled at this point. So here, a few examples of the U.S. government, if you can call it that, continuing to be occupied by a foreign power. Here's Randy Fine, who's just one of the most extreme examples in all this. Oh, but guess what? He's in Israel. You know, like all of them continue to go to Israel. Why does that make sense to anybody? Is there a reason? I mean, it seems to happen every other week at this point. That somebody, like groups of people are traveling to Israel. It doesn't make much sense. Other than the fact that there's overwhelming, undue, or rather just unnecessary influence from one entity in the world over this government. That they feel that every one of them has to go and pay homage to this group, no matter what. In honor, he says, to meet Smotrich. This guy. Oh, sorry. We'll go back in a second. This one here. Smotrich. He said this and many other examples that's what I was just pointing to. Might be, quote, justified and moral to cause 2 million Gazans to die of hunger, but the world won't let us. But yeah, let's continue to stress that they're totally not doing what he said we want to do, or they told you they were doing. That's Smotrich. He's one of the most radical maniacs in this government, even according to the Israeli public. Here he is meeting him proudly. Today, to talk about our mutual fight to save Western civilization. And by that, he means destroying Western civilization so the Israeli government can rule the world. That's what these radical religious Zionists believe. And this is just funny to me. This guy's been doing these all day, apparently. All these people left and right with these Israeli cheerleading outfits on. It's perfect. It's exactly what's going on. Here's Randy Fine on, what is it? Corporate media. And he literally, just like I said, just rattles off the lies. I said, this vile person is still openly lying about who killed whom on October 7th, and even about the total. He's still citing 1,200 people. That was removed. That was walked back early to 1,100 something, then even further. And the point is now we understand, anyone paying attention, the link is for it right there, the Hannibal Directive. There's been like 6 people within their government who have openly admitted that that was ordered and carried out. Not just that it looked like it, but that's what they ordered. And still to this point is being carried out. And he wants you to believe that's just not true. He also cheers on the starvation of innocent, not in his eyes, as he repeatedly states, innocent children, and even the Israeli hostages that he claims to care about. But keep starving them because we can't help the people that will suffer because we're hurting the bad guy, the way they see it. Like, think about the logic. We can't give food to the enemy. Okay, fine. What about the people that you have there? How long until the food runs out and they die? We can't fund the enemy. Do you not care about the hostages? Release the hostages. It's like, what? Like, it's just game is becoming, you know, I can't think of a better word. It's just becoming so obvious. Release the hostages. Well, what about the 15 times they've already tried to do that? Well, you're a racist. You know, it's falling flat right now. And it has been for a long time. Daniel McAdams says this is what he's referring to. This is Sarah Huckabee Sanders. It was great to meet with Smotrich and discuss the ways we can increase trade and investment in Israel. Okay. Daniel says this sick anti-Christian Huckabee family showing their true colors. Very interesting. Here's Ambassador Mike Huckabee, who also was just there, saying, heck, I thought she came to see her dad. Which was it, Huckabee? What does that mean? Is that supposed to be an undermining point? You know, and this is Netanyahu. Prime Minister of Netanyahu met this morning in his Jerusalem office with Arkansas Governor Huckabee. Why is a governor going there? Why are any of them going there repeatedly, over and over? I think you already get the point, guys. I think everybody everywhere is starting to get the point. Khaleesi says you both went to see your daddy. That's a very weird. They're like laughing about the fact that they're all going over to pay homage to the foreign government. Medea Benjamin says, why aren't these Republican members of Congress at home in their districts, taking care of their constituents instead of being in Israel? America first or Israel first? Everybody's seeing it. And these are underling, young, whatever people. I don't think every one of them are in Congress, if I can just eyeballing it. But I think the idea that you got these tours where they just bring all these young politicians and they learn real quick what they're supposed to do, what will get them to the top. Now this, I think, is just shocking. And it speaks for itself. Tammy Bruce telling you that she's not going to speak about the opinions of the government, by the way, which is actually her job.
Johnson was in the West Bank, which he referred to as Judea and Samaria, and said that it
In case you guys didn't see, I touched on it yesterday. Mike Johnson and, every other person in Congress, the point was Mike Johnson went to, pray at the Wailing Wall, as even George Galloway called out the weirdness of that versus one of the most holy sites for Christians right down the street. Doesn't make any sense other than doing it for Israel. My point, or I shouldn't say it like that. There's other, you could say because you think it's important to them and you want to be respectful. But the point is that to see all of them do it like some kind of a ritual is very weird. And so he went there. Then Mike Johnson went to West Bank, which I told you yesterday. And he was taking pictures in the West Bank like that's not illegal occupation, according to literally everybody, not just Gaza, but West Bank is illegal annexation of territory, according to every single person, even Mike Pompeo, when only as far as saying it's not inconsistent with the law. And then they went right back under Biden and they still have that standing policy that these are illegal. But let's not forget that Trump already made a deal with Adelson to do just that. And they are rapidly annexing all the West Bank and kicking people out of their homes. So Mike Johnson went there, not only calling it Judea and Samaria, which is not what they're called, that's what Israel calls them, but saying that this land belongs to the Jewish people. The Jewish people, not the Israelis, but the Jewish people, which makes no sense. Does it belong to the Ethiopian Jews that Israel treats like they're criminals and not second-tier citizens? No, not those Jews. What about the Jews during World War II that the Zionist organization didn't want to be part of Israel because they thought they were weak and they told them they should die over there? No, not those ones. Clearly, it's about Zionism, guys, and it's about control. The point, though, is that either he's played by it or he's doing this for the agenda. The way she responds to this is mind-blowing because it's not only illegal what he's doing, it also sets a very clear policy that they're okay with illegal annexation of territory. So next time you claim somebody else is doing that, you better be allowing it, right, if they're in this same logic. But the way he responds, I think, is important. It's good.
Belongs to the Jewish people. Is that official U.S., which he referred to as Judea and Samaria, and said that it rightfully belongs to the Jewish people? Is that official U.S. policy? And if it's not, what is U.S. policy towards
basic question?
I've said this about other diplomats who've spoken their minds, including Ambassador Huckabee. Certainly, that's not.
Get there.
If there's a policy in that regard, you would hear it from me. So I think I can say that. I'm not going to speak for him or characterize his words in any certain ways, but clearly that is his opinion.
But it's not the opinion of the U.S. government?
Well, I'm not going to speak about opinion of the government. And if there's a policy regarding...
Again, that's a job, by the way.
...the status in any region of the world, but certainly in the Middle East, I would wait to hear it from Secretary Rubio and President Trump. All right.
How embarrassing. Right, you mean Trump that's currently allowing that and made a deal with Miriam Adelson to literally allow that? They're just cowards, guys. Tammy Bruce is actually just, they're all ridiculous to me. I just think she's just clumsy about it, but so too are they, all of them. And that's what I said, by the way. Let me grab this for you, just so you guys can see in case you haven't seen it before. That keeps happening with this, by the way. I hate these things. Miriam Adelson and the Haaretz article about her basically making a deal, with Trump. I absolutely hate these things. There we go. Trump is desperate for Miriam Adelson's cash. Her condition, West Bank annexation. Very, very, very public. It's not a secret. And they're doing that now. So I said, so who exactly will speak about the opinion of the government, Tammy? That's what you're supposed to do. I said, you might just be worse than KJP, which funny enough, people somehow took as not as bad. My point was clear. They're all ridiculous. The point was just to say, because KJP was just like a special kind of stupid in this conversation, or just really bad at the job. The way she conducts these things, it's just, I honestly think it's not that she's as bad as some of the worst people we've seen, but just that all of them have been put in a position that's near impossible to defend, if not impossible. And they do it anyway, because their job is to blindly support Trump or whoever's in power, no matter what, regardless of your principles, regardless of integrity. That's where we are. James Lee had an interesting clip that I wanted to share in this part of the show, which is about somebody running for Congress. To me, I think this is a sign of a dying thing, this whole thing, the way it's all working. I mean, the structure with AIPAC and lobbying, and this country is shockingly aware of this now. And so what you're seeing, I think, is the over the top effort to try to just jam this back in, and I don't think it's going to work. But the way he covers this is perfectly sarcastic. You'll see what I mean.
Never ever endorse anybody for president, for Congress, for Senate, for whatever. But today I am here to announce my full-throated support for Nick for Israel for U.S. Congress. Because I agree with him. America is facing an existential problem, and that only 80% of Congress is funded by AIPAC, which means that 20% of them are anti-Semitic.
Guys, that's actually posted on his site for his campaign. Underlined. That 20% that aren't funded by AIPAC are anti-Semitic, which all that means is they're in a backward way proving to you that AIPAC is going after every politician, everyone they can to influence their opinion. How long? And that's not even technically lobbying outside of the way they do this for many reasons is not even really lobbying, in my opinion. It's bribery, but that's what lobbying is. The point is that what they've done is turn this into an like every moment, all the time, funding or pulling influence when they decide, and they're dictating policy. It's very clear. Remember that AIPAC was supposed to be registered as a foreign agent. JFK wanted that to happen, and then he died. I'm not even implying that's the only thing involved in that conversation, but it's clearly one that matters. On his website, how can you argue people that just don't take funding from that group are somehow racist? That's called desperation to me.
Okay, you see this chart. The blue, politicians bought by AIPAC. This is good. Red, anti-Semitic. Not good. We need people that are going to fight for common sense policies, patriotic Israel first policies for America in Congress. Okay, policies.
Guys, just so you know, like for the podcast, that's actually what that says. Nick for Israel, and that's his name, by the way. I forget you're not all seeing this. Nick for Israel. That's what his name is. Or that's the way he's framing it. So it says Nick for Israel for U.S. Congress is committed to governing not just for those who voted for him, but for all Israelis. My patriotic Israel first platform for America is built on the following common sense policies. Patriotic Israel first platform. That's crazy.
For America in Congress. Okay, policies like granting Israel 3 Senate seats. Yes, absolutely. Provide tax credits to companies that move operations to settlements in the West Bank. Establish Benjamin Netanyahu's birthday as a federal holiday. Yes, God bless that man. This next one's huge for the veterans. Allow IDF veterans to board commercial flights before U.S. veterans. Declare Tel Aviv the capital of California, Oregon, and both Dakotas. And as a California resident, I am 100% on board with this. And finally, one that we've been fighting for a long time, Medicare for all Israelis. Yes, healthcare is a human right for Israelis. If you want to donate, you can go to nickforisraelforcongress.us. But if you're a little short on cash, no worries. Simply like and share this message if you, like Nick, believe that America is all about faith, it's about freedom, and it's about Israel.
Yeah, so just so you know, the point is that this could very well be something that was organized in a way to be a criticism. You know, my point is just to highlight this overlap with Congress and what they're doing. Right. So he even added that background like music. He's very clear. He's trying to make a point that he doesn't mean what he's saying. But my point is that these people in Congress that you can very clearly see, like on the surface, advocating for Israel it's exactly what the point that he's making here. It's obvious that what they're doing is not America first, arguing that what we need, in every possible way. I mean, the crux of it is that they're telling you can't say things if it's about this country. Always shows you the obvious. You can criticize the U.S., you can be racist against anything except Israel, even though that's not really what most people are doing. I just think that's ridiculous to me, just over the top. Now, this is interesting in the continuation of this. We talked about this yesterday. Now, Glenn Greenwald called this out. This is about the Times of Israel article that essentially argues that the Epstein files were used against Trump to put him back in his place. Seems very interesting to me. Which you watched yesterday's show if you want to read through it. Trump, Israel, and the Epstein files. And it says, just the start, it says, the Trump and his administration criticized Netanyahu and Israel, and now the Epstein files are haunting him. And they go on to make a very clear case about, well, he did this and did that. I don't think that's even accurate. I don't think they're even at odds. But what's interesting is if they are, this would the use of these as a coercive tool would say two things: that he is on the list, and that's how they use it to control him, which wouldn't be that hard to wrap your mind around with what's going on in the world today. But I just wanted to reiterate that. That's very interesting to me. It's being put out there by Israel, by the Times of Israel, no less. And Glenn says, a Times of Israel blogger strongly suggests, now, like I said, the same thing I reported it as, it's not stating that as a fact, or even saying they're controlled by the files. but it is clearly like that's what he's suggesting with like right on the surface. But there are others that are reporting this as Israel says they control their, like that kind of way. That's typical mainstream alternative media. One suggests, then threatens that leaks about Trump's involvement with Epstein are Israel's punishment for Trump's refusal to bomb Iran more. He warns it really doesn't pay to start up with Israel. I mean, it's wild to me. Now, here's what's crazy. He literally cites exactly what is happening there. Not even an opinion to it, right? Or, not even an opinion. He just literally cites the context. This person says, oh my God, shut the F up, you're anti-Semitic. And Glenn just says, anyone who cites articles from Israeli newspapers is racist. This is my larger, like one I was saying earlier. Like that is unhinged or your narrative isn't working anymore. Now, Glenn Greenwald also points this out about Trump and DEI. Well, we keep hearing a lot about that, right? Well, it's not really going away, at least not, in the context of what would be the right way to frame that? Like with woke and manipulation, pronouns and woke censorship. Well, that still exists, but it's just more fine-tuned to just one kind of hate speech, but it's still there. So my point, it was never really about the actual, whether it was about Jews or Christians or whatever. It was about being able to apply that for however, using control over speech for an outcome. Maybe just for Israel. I don't know. But so my point is that on DEI in the same way, it's the same kind of evolution. He said, and this is from Forward, which he cites as one of the most pro-Israel Jewish outlets in America, how Trump is banning DEI at universities except for Jews. That's the title. How Trump is banning DEI at universities except for Jews. It says the Trump administration ban on DEI at universities has one big exception. Jewish students get special support. And the article's going, praise, great. Not racist or discriminatory or one-sided. It would be if it was Muslims, sure. But just Jews, no, that's what should happen. I find that to be wild. Now, obviously, let's not forget the way that this kind of thing is used to drive people to actually have hatred towards an entire religion, many of which don't believe in Zionism, or that this should even make sense. But then that gets pointed to as why Zionism needs to exist. It is, look, Glenn's talked about this. Dan Cohen's talked about this. It's important to listen to people who have the courage, especially when they're Jewish, to call out what this is. And he says, not only is Trump not banning DEI for Jewish students, but he's aggressively expanding them and forcing colleges to adopt them, or removing funding. And that's totally that's totally free speech or compliant, or, the idea is that you're using these tools to coercively change what people are doing and saying. There's no way else around that. Glenn Greenwald also points out, just making the point, and he says he sees, I actually continue to find it really fascinating that someone like Glenn is right here with us. Right. And I think that doesn't change that. I think, regardless of whoever was around it, I still believe this, and I'll stand by what I believe is right, regardless of how unpopular it is. But I find it really interesting that people at his level are now like, you're occupied by Israel. I just think that's so crazy to see that we got here finally, the awareness of what's really happening. Members of Congress spend their recess in their home district, he says, and then it shows a caption of Israel. Can't talk right now. Quote tweets the Prime Minister of Israel account that says Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met yesterday evening with an AIPAC organized delegation of Republican members of Congress. Yeah, and so he frames it as members of Congress spend the recess at their home district. There's really no way to misunderstand that. Ian Carroll, who has been really quiet lately, not that has to mean anything. I just thought that was interesting. He was, prolific out there. And if you look at this is one of the only a few things he said in August, or just like over the last couple of days. But he comes out and captions Tom Emmer, who says, this week I have the honor of leading the delegation at AIPAC. Everywhere you look. Ian Carroll says, our whole Congress takes a recess to avoid voting on the Epstein files, release, and instead go and kiss the wall and say hi to Bibi. He says something much grosser than that. But you're anti-Semitic for noticing. Treason. I mean, the Epstein files, all the things around it, the lies that built up to it. I don't know how we can deny what we're watching. And I'll include these, as always, just the different clips of Donald Trump telling you what we're discussing today. And I'll play this one quickly since I felt it was important to reiterate because we probably haven't listened to it in a while.
The biggest change I've seen in Congress is Israel literally owned Congress. You understand that 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And it was so powerful. It was so powerful, and I think you know exactly what I'm saying. They had such power. Israel had such power, and rightfully, over Congress.
You know,
and that's the second. It basically reiterates it a different way. I just, for time, just always cut that. The point is, he goes on to say the same thing. Let me just play it since it started. Whoops.
Was the most powerful lobby in the country.
Still is.
15 years ago. Today, between TLAV and AOC and all of these people, what they're doing, Israel, they don't have the backing that they once had.
You'll give it to them.
Yeah, I'm good.
Very weird. So, yes, right? They should control Congress like they once did, is what he said very clearly. And as always, on the show, we went through the full conversation. It's not taken out of context. Can't do it every single time. The point is, it's very clear what he said. I don't know how you deny that with what's going on in the world today. So let's bring this into another conversation that I think that does overlap with this in a very interesting way. Now, as I said before, I'm going to go through this somewhat quickly. I plan on doing much deeper overviews of this once this develops more, but I do think this is important to highlight now, and especially the way this came about. Okay, so this was a tweet, or Truth Social, whatever it's called. Donald Trump says crime in Washington, D.C. is totally out of control. Local youths and gang members, some only 14, 15, and 16 years old, are randomly attacking, mugging, maiming, and shooting innocent citizens at the same time, knowing that they will be almost immediately released. Now, I don't know if the whole point is that supposed to be something about Democrats. It's clear that this is, Washington, D.C. is not just Democrats, but the point is, if that's happening anywhere, obviously that's a problem. But why just about Washington, D.C.? Clearly, there's things like this all over the country. And you could argue it's about Democrats if that, makes more sense to you. I don't think it's unique to Democrat places alone, but it's odd that it's on D.C., which we're going with somewhere with this. But so the interesting point, though, is first, he says they're not afraid of the law enforcement because they know nothing ever happens to them. Aren't you the current administration? Doesn't that matter? Isn't this feels like a cut against something Democrat related? Or is he just calling out? Who's he calling out? It seems strange. But he says, but it's going to happen now. That something's going to happen to them, he says. The law in D.C. must be changed, to prosecute these minors as adults and lock them up for a long time, starting at age 14. That's a strange statement. So now you're going to start arresting children because they do. I mean, look, it's a crime, right? There's clear leeway is not the right word. There's a word for it that even makes more sense in a court of law, but there is leeway given to judges to make decisions like this, where they can charge you as an adult, or even the lawyers can put that forward. The idea that he's trying to change the law to go after people that, as a broad discussion, because this happened in one context, they're trying to make a big story about, which it should. It was crime. People should be arrested. But that's a weird way to go with it. Now, how much you want to bet that gets turned into, the whole ADL, the young generation is the biggest problem. They all see through Israel, become something where you go after people, even children who are, that's one overlap, or you could make it about the current political situation. You can make it about Epstein. The point is you're now going after children, or you're opening the door to that, the conversation of arresting 14-year-olds because they break the law. If they break the law, charge them for the crime. Or if it's something so severe, you already have the opening to make that the case. This feels very weird to me. There's a lot of ways you can go in with that, but I think that's not the point today, but that just seems really strange. And he says the most recent victim was beaten mercilessly by local thugs. Weirdly enough, they're talking about that big balls guy from Doge. We'll get into that in a second. It says Washington, D.C. must be safe, clean, and beautiful for all Americans. No, the point is that's what triggered this post. What happened to him? What a coincidence. Importantly, and he says for the world to see, if D.C. doesn't get its act together and quickly, we will have no choice but to take federal control of the city and run this city how it should be run and put criminals on notice that they're not going to get away with it anymore. Perhaps it should have been done a long time ago. Then this incredible young man and so many others, he didn't even mention him, which is strange. So that you didn't even make it clear you're talking about, but now it's clear he's talking about that one guy, which we'll show you in a second. Where was I? Young man and so many others would not have had to go through the horrors of violent crime. Okay, so you're telling me that if you controlled the area, that there just simply wouldn't, that can happen anywhere, and it does happen anywhere. People commit crimes all over the place in some of the safest cities in the world. So this is, as usual, taking advantage of this to achieve something, which anybody being honest with themselves with what we've seen well before even this administration knows that they're not trying to solve this problem. They're trying to use this problem to begin something new. And that's what like Bruce Fine just said in our last podcast on Fine Points. This every single member of government, and he's been in this government. He was in the Reagan administration. He's saying that there is never a pure motive. They always have an ulterior motive every time. Same thing here. I don't believe that this matters. I mean, look, there's plenty of other places where this might matter more than just in this one location. Why wouldn't they start there? I think it's about this area for clear reasons we'll get into next. And he says, if this continues, I am going to exert my powers and federalize this city, make America great again. Very strange thing to say. And Maj says, except DC is already is federal, which we'll get into the nuance here. It's interesting. It was never a city. It's literally a federally owned and controlled corporate charter situation. Yeah, you can decide if that's exactly the accuracy. But Elon Musk says a few days ago, a gang of about a dozen young men tried to assault a woman in her car at night in DC. Yeah, there's police for that. That's a crazy thing, and it shouldn't. If it's continuing to get out of control, then there's people that could make decisions for this local area. Now, the question is whether it should become like every other location in regard to like a state. We'll talk about that too. That's been called on for a long time. But it says a Doge team member saw this was happening, ran to defend her, and was severely beaten to the point of concussion. But he saved her. Doesn't that just seem insane? Like, what are the odds of this guy from Doge happens to be there, and it becomes the impetus for why they want to federalize Washington, D.C. and turn it into maybe a freedom city? Maybe that's one direction it could go. Let's talk about it. Doge worker, Big Balls, that was his little, what do you call it? His tag, whatever you call it, what do you call that? It's just his name, the name he used when he was online. Doge worker Big Balls bloodied after D.C. attack. Trump must call to federalize D.C. Doesn't that just feel like a really sharp, very interesting. But I just want to show you that because that's he was involved in this. Now, here is Alex Jones back in February highlighting this guy, or rather the discussion about it. And it says, massive Big Balls Doge update, because they all weirdly talked about this thing for a minute. And it says, Trump sides with Musk and J.D. Vance to bring Big Balls back into the Doge fold. Right, and now it just doesn't exist anymore? Clearly, that's what it was all about, right? Saving money that didn't actually happen that way. Actually, I forgot that I was going to talk about this in another show coming up, but I will show you this real quick. Oh, it is right here. I forgot I did add it back. Doge overstated its savings of its largest cuts by 97%. We were all, those of us that called it out weren't, but most people were played about what this was. I think that's shockingly clear. Now, the supposed leader of Doge, who's really the leader of the digital services, which what it was before they turned it into Doge, all they did was change the name, Amy Gleason, is now presenting tech health-focused discussions about wearables, and because that's about cutting costs in the government? No, it's about digital services, because that's what it really was. They used this, in my opinion, to get what they wanted from what was happening for AI or whatever it was. Now, Musk is moving on, or, continuing his government agenda, but from a different spot. The point, back to this, what was the whole point of this? Why were they so adamant about getting this one guy back in for something that didn't even really pan out? After he was doxxed by a USAID-funded journalist, not even remotely, guys. It's so weird the way that they covered this. But clearly there was something there. They made sure he was back in, and then Doge randomly fizzled out, and now he got beat up in D.C., and now he's being used as the impetus to start a federalized city, or to federalize the city. Now, here's an interesting point to understand before we go forward. Under just frequently asked questions about statehood in D.C. It says, what is Washington, D.C.? Now, Washington, D.C. isn't a state, it's a district. It says D.C. stands for District of Columbia. Its creation comes directly from the U.S. Constitution, which provides that district, quote, not exceeding 10 miles square would, quote, become the seat of the government of the United States. Now, it says Congress established the federal district in 1790 to serve as the nation's capital. Now, to the point of what Maj is saying, you could argue very clearly that this is not even remotely what it is today, or really ever was. There's all sorts of valid conversations to have about what places like London and Washington, D.C. represent in the global conversation. Now, you should get into that, look into it, but today it'll detract from the point we're making about where this is going. The point is to consider whether that it isn't remotely what this is today, and this is just the narrative to use for them to seize control of this for something different, or to turn it into some seat of power for the technocrat, administration that's coming. But it says the Constitution dictates that the federal district be under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Congress. Okay, so here's an interesting point. Regardless of whether we want that or we think D.C. is something else, it's fascinating to me that here we are with another point in which the Trump administration is threatening to violate the Constitution. The Constitution dictates that it should be under the U.S. control of U.S. Congress. And so he's going to say, we're going to take control of this. Now, federal, you could argue, is somehow, he's talking about the executive branch. That's what he's talking about. And is in that point, is he even actually talking about taking control of it and turning it into some kind of a state? That doesn't seem to be even remotely what they're talking about. So to me, this seems like the reality is, as it was laid down, that it was supposed to sort of be the seat of power of Congress and how it ruled through that. And that then changes the dynamics of how that works in regard to legalities. But you would argue that if it's this location central to the power seat of everything in this country, that they wouldn't just let it dwindle into chaos and people would be beaten up and arrested and drug rates through the roof and like every bad thing. It seems strange. Now, it goes on to say, what do residents of D.C. want? Do they want statehood, or why? And it says the people of Washington, D.C. deserve the same rights that the people in the other 50 states enjoy. District residents are required to fulfill all the obligations of U.S. citizenship, paying taxes, voting, and all the stuff that we all hate. Yet, for over 200 years, we have been denied, that's how they're framing it, a voice in our national government and sovereignty over our local affairs. Right. So the point is the people there are not represented as something in, California, it go for House and Senate. You've got representation, right? So in this case, that's not really how that works. It's sort of the central location for this to be conducted. But the argument, which I don't even think this is really what it's about, is that these people want that. And so they want it to be turned into a state of its own. And it says, admitting the residential and commercial parts of D.C. as a state will at least give us representation in Congress and control over our state and local government. Interesting, right? Now, these are just basic overviews. I think it's important to understand that most people don't think about. So this comes to the reason I'm talking about this today. I saw this video. This wasn't posted on August 4th. This came out, I don't know, a month ago or so. I saw this going around. And what she's going to tell you is that she heard a rumor, which is obviously why we didn't get into it, because it's very subjective. But with what's now happening, it's starting to stand out even more. And guess what that rumor is? That Donald Trump is going to take over Washington, D.C. and hand it over to people like Peter Thiel. So obviously I heard that and I'm like, well, that's interesting, but a rumor. But she makes the case that she heard it from a bunch of independent, different people that didn't talk to each other, and it seems to be circulating. So True Stream Media says, if sudden talk of federalizing D.C. is just cover, which is one of the things I'm considering, to turn it into a freedom city, really a technocratic, hellscape as far as I'm concerned, proponents of freedom cities beware. Every group that has ever tried this in history has failed. From the Templars, who were tortured into confessions as an excuse to clear King Philip's massive debt to them, to the Cistercian monk, whose monasteries were dissolved under King Henry VIII rule and their properties and funds seized and divvied up. Any time a group threatens to live outside the established government's rule, it's always short-lived. Now, that's a fair thing to say, but it seems to suggest that that's something like people breaking away from Trump's, or rather the U.S. government's rule. I see this differently. I see this as being something that is happening within our government's control. So the argument would be they wouldn't want that. This wouldn't be something they would push back. It'd be like California seceding and then going after it. It's a fair point to consider, but I think it's more about the transition of power from their power structure. It says that she goes on to say, or they go on to say, this is especially so under corrupt governments, and probably even more so for a corrupt government in a crumbling late stage empire. She's talking about the U.S. government or U.S. empire, regardless of what those in current power might promise you. It says, without fundamental change, the people running things will eventually come for you, and when the pendulum swings again, it will only be a matter of time, whether this admin or the next one or the next. You'll go down with everybody else, whether or not you carve out a special city for yourself with different rules and slap the word freedom on it in short term. The only way America gets fixed is to return to the foundational first principles. Now, I 100% agree with that. If we're forced to live in a state of society, if we are forced to live in this kind of society, I completely agree with that. Now, I, however, opt for a different path if that was what people were open to hearing, which is no government. And it's not some pipe dream fantasy. There's valid things. We've talked about it many times, but clearly, and I'll constantly keep bringing it up as long as I do this, but clearly people are not there. But incremental steps, guys. We're getting there to the understanding of how government works, it seems, in the world. But everything else you try will fail, they say, and to think otherwise is either ignorance or hubris. So here's the clip, keeping this in mind, where she's telling you what she heard in Washington, D.C.
Politics, and I just got back from a trip in Washington, D.C. I work in politics, and I just got back from a trip in Washington, D.C., and I want to tell you the absolutely unhinged rumor I heard from current and former federal workers and people on Capitol Hill about what Donald Trump is about to do next, because if it's true, it will alter the course of American history forever. I want to preface this by saying I'm not a journalist. What I'm about to share with you is just a rumor, though I did hear it from multiple people who do not know each other from multiple areas of the federal government. So with all those disclaimers, I'm going to share this with you anyway, because I think you deserve to know. Long story short, Donald Trump is trying to give Washington, D.C. to billionaire Peter Thiel. I mean that literally, not figuratively. Like, he is trying to give a billionaire control over the land and the people within Washington, D.C. The specific rumor is that instead of granting Washington, D.C. statehood like its residents have been demanding for years, he wants to actually roll back the little bit of independence that they already have of self-government. Apparently, he's considering turning the district into what some call a freedom city. Proponents of freedom cities advocate for areas and territories that are governed and owned completely by corporations, so essentially corporate colonies. So there's no federal government oversight, there's no state government oversight. Essentially, these freedom cities are ruled by CEO kings. So from what I'm hearing, the Trump administration is exploring abusing DC's existing status as a district to make it the first freedom city and give it to his billionaire buddy, Peter Thiel. This is a disaster for reasons I shouldn't have to elaborate on. Obviously, that would set an incredibly dangerous precedent. It's hugely symbolic to give the area where the federal government runs to a billionaire. We're really talking about a new era of colonization rooted in techno-fascism.
There it is. Not just a billionaire, but a technocrat.
And while this particular rumor is new, Trump's association with people who lobby for the creation of freedom cities is well known, and they were at his inauguration. I know it sounds far-fetched, but we really should start fighting against this now before it becomes a reality.
Yep, and that was True Stream Media reshared that, and then added a point beneath it. Oh, and by the way, so to elaborate to what she's saying there, so you could argue that there's two ways to look at it to take what True Stream Media was highlighting, which would be that if this was just Trump, let's say, or just like the Republican Party, who's trying to carve out their own thing, and then other people come to power, I completely agree with their point, that would likely end up in them kicking them out and taking it back, or, just, it would change. But if this is being done, let's say, as the whole of government for the transition of power to something else, or by a foreign power at the expense of the United States, then you could see why that wouldn't just swing back the other way when they're completely in control of the direction, right? I mean, it's worth considering both. They go on to say, case in point, and this is something we've talked about already. I'm telling you guys, this is worth, demonstrating our value for you today, okay? Because we are so far ahead of some of these stories. I know very few people who have even talked about Prospera. We covered this in 2024, September. The technocratic regime change under the guise of freedom technocrats are slowly taking control. Telling you, this is only going to get more obvious as this goes forward. And we're seeing it. Okay. So my point is Prospera in Honduras, I'll come back to in a second, is Peter Thiel funded technocratic hellscape framed as libertarian city. And that's what I'll go back to this. We'll come back to in a second. This is an article we've already pointed to. The title is The For-Profit City That Might Come Crashing Down. Now this is evolving into, not immediately today. I think this was, I don't know, I forget what the date is, but I think a couple months ago. The point is about the idea that because of the transition of power in Honduras, now they're starting to get kicked out, or they're starting to lose control, and they don't care. I'll come back to it in a second. Now, what Truth Stream Media says, case in point, the Freedom City, in quotes, I would add, that started in 2021 in Honduras, I'll add, after an illegal U.S. regime change in Honduras, that it's easy to prove, is already facing opposition from the latest government, which began stripping away special privileges. Remember, it's an autonomous zone, like right out of Sustainable Development Goals. And that's supposed to be what the conservatives support. It says it was granted under its predecessors. Same as it ever was. Same, wherever the land is, you will deal with its government's instability and corruption, no matter what promises get made to you in a short term or what your contracts say. Now, they're taking this, from the idea that somehow that Prospera is like, whether they think it's good or not, they're the ones being like lost in this because they hope that the government would maintain it. I see it different. I see this as ultimately as this is a trial balloon for exactly what they're rolling out, in other places, and maybe what she's saying might happen in DC. Very interesting, isn't it? Now, again, remember, I'm going to go over this in depth as this develops, but this is important. Watch this show again. This is what this is. The quick rundown, okay, is that in 2021 or 4, there was an illegal regime change carried out with support of the U.S. government. And before that, they were trying to do this and they couldn't get it to happen because the government wouldn't let it. Then they carry out a regime change, and then they're able to create their autonomous zone on land that was part of Honduras. Okay, then they couldn't get past what they wanted for the special zone. And so they removed people in the judge positions and put other people in there. And then boom, what do you know? They voted in what they wanted. Okay. So they finally got, through corruption and manipulation, their autonomous zone in Honduras. Then from that place forward, there's been criticism. Read these articles that they're pointing to and others about it. It is rife with corruption. There's all sorts of problems in the area. They're starting to absorb, I think, if I remember correctly, I think it's called Crawfish Rock. There's a place that they're absorbing. Like they're literally, expanding out and taking more territory. That there's a lot to get into. The point is to come forward today that they're highlighting, True Street Media is pointing to, is because of switching of power, which I think is, likely it's because right now the U.S. government's clearly stretched too thin. I don't think they're in control of all the things that are happening. They're causing chaos and agendas to spin out, but I don't think, like my point would be, if they wanted this and they were not overwhelmed with everything else, they'd probably carry out another regime change or probably have not lost in the first place. But other people got into power in Honduras. And one of the first things they talked about was they have to go. We don't want a Prospera here. They're violating the law. They revoked the special autonomous zone designation. But guess what Prospera did? Nothing. They're still there. They're saying we don't care. I mean, it's not saying that, but you can they're not acknowledging that they're being forced out or trying to be. And the leader of Honduras spoke up. I played it for you and said, the U.S. government is trying to commit another regime change. I argued then it was because of this, and that Prospera was probably aware that once that regime change took place, they wouldn't have to leave anyway. But so here we are since then. This was last year. And so they're still there. Honduras doesn't want them there. People around them are saying this is not, and I mean, they're not bound by the law of Honduras. They're not bound by anything other than the CEO king that runs it. And this is why Trump even talks about the Freedom City point, because let it be run by a CEO. Isn't that what America wants? No, not really. Maybe the kind of, as I said earlier, the gaggle of blind followers around any of these politicians. But the whole point is that in these articles, they very clearly point to Prospera as an example of the Freedom City direction. All covered in the show. So here's just one example of these articles, and I think they might even mention it in here. Yeah, right there. So first, what are freedom cities? Billionaire CEO's plan could reshape America. March 12th, 2025. It says a coalition of campaign groups opposed to regulation has called for the creation of freedom cities, in quotes, across the United States. And the idea is backed by some of the most high-profile billionaires in the United States, including Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen. What do you know? The cities would be pockets of deregulated areas with the aim of promoting innovation and technological advancement. Kind of sounds like a different name for a 50-minute city, because it is. I mean, and again, if you got sucked into the left-right idea of it all, it wasn't about the specific left-leaning elements of it. It was just about control, guys. The 15-minute city is an idea about a technocratic controlled. That's exactly what this becomes. Now here it says another organization pushing for this concept is Prospera. Telling you guys, we were calling this out back then, and we're going to come back to it more. But the point is, they're supported by Thiel and Andreessen. Both of them support Prospera. It's a trial balloon. Telling you guys. Now, let's not forget that Palantir, Peter Thiel, has a strategic partnership with the government committing genocide right now. And they're using that AI tech they gave them to commit that genocide. And that's the very AI surveillance tech they're using on you in the United States, because Trump, or U.S. government, but that was allowed his administration. And that's the same concept, the same tech, the same everything that will be applied to this idea. That should worry everybody. Sure as hell worries me. Now, here's a clip I think is relevant to play again. The idea that he very clearly says that it's his mind to defer to Israel. So if you are aware of this kind of infiltration overlap to what they're doing, or CARP or the rest of them, that will tell you that they blindly side with Israel, shouldn't that play a factor? Whether it's about the Israeli Zionism agenda, or if it's just about the fact that that government's committing a genocide proudly, shouldn't that matter that these people are the ones that are building cities, are claiming it's going to be the future of this country, whether or not that's DC? You're damn right it should.
What do you think about the use of artificial intelligence, or lavender, by the IDF in identifying Hamas targets? And secondly, do you agree with Elon Musk about that the population decline is a risk for humanity? What do you think of
Look, I'm not, without going into all the I'm not on top of all the details of what's going on in Israel because my bias is to defer to Israel. It's not for us to second guess everything, and I believe that broadly the IDF gets to decide what it wants to do, and that they're broadly in the right, and that's sort of the perspective I come back to. And if I fall into the trap of arguing you on every detailed point, I would actually be conceding the broader issue that the Middle East should be micromanaged from Cambridge. And I think,
or maybe back to the question about whether or not your AI tech should be used to kill children. But let's make it about political consideration about governments. My God, I mean, it's the same thing we see in politics, but he's very, very clumsy at it.
That's just simply absurd. And so I'm not going to concede that point. And what was your the other?
It's insane. Now, to the end of this segment point, this point is that to go back to that thing I said before, Doge overstating its, and this, to be clear about this, it's about the largest cuts they claimed, right? So like the top 5 combined of the largest cuts they claimed they made, you add them up, and it turns out it was like, I'll play the clip in a coming up show. It was something like $8 billion, and it turned out to be $135 million that was actually saved. Just like a 97% lie is what it was. Now, my point in even highlighting this is the idea that, this is about Doge. And what was Doge? Was it about government cuts? Well, I mean, either if that's the case, then they spectacularly failed or they didn't even try. And now we see bigger government, more spending. So pretty clear that wasn't really what it was about. So I think it's obvious with the way they're going and what they're telling you with now no regulation because of executive order that the AI direction was always the plan. And this is the show on the 8th of, it's in 2025 in March, the impending future of AI government, but who will control the AI? So Doge, I believe that was what it was about, at least in large part. Maybe we'll find out more in the future. The point, though, is they clearly scraped up all the data they could get, allowed Israel access to all of it. That's very real. And now Doge just kind of vanished, except for Big Balls, who's now helping them, federalize the DC area or turn it into a freedom city. Very strange, but I think that's what it's really about. And I'm only showing this for the point that this overall, like not just this point, not this thing I'm showing you, but this direction. It's very clear to me that where that all comes together with technocracy, Peter Thiel, Palantir, Israel. I mean, it's all clearly there's an intersection right around America, right around your rights and your direction. I mean, that has to matter to Americans more than anything. Are we choosing our direction right now? Really worth asking. And so the AI point of it comes in very clearly with the Prospera element, the technocratic element, the surveillance element, the genocide committing element. It's central to this conversation. And so this is interesting on top of it all. Thomas Massey shared this today. Now, I'm not necessarily convinced this ties into what we're talking about. Either way, it's worth seeing. But it's worth considering that this may well be exactly something going on around all of this. So what this is there's been so remember, Mike Johnson's in Israel. And weirdly, apparently he sent some letter about letting this guy act as House Speaker and taking action when no one's there. Now, Thomas Massey frames this as the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader, who aren't here right now, are convening a pro forma session of Congress in empty chambers during the August recess solely, he claims, to block Donald Trump from making recess appointments. And he says, why is nobody covering this? That's interesting. Now, I only say he frames it as that because I'm not really, I don't know. There's probably many other things it could be. My point, though, is that clearly that seems odd around all that's happening when they're all in Israel. It's very strange, or everything else that's happening right now, even the Epstein point, which they all left to hide from. And I said, sure seems odd that Trump and his gaggle of blind followers are not screaming about this, right? Why isn't Trump tweeting or socialing about this? Doesn't that seem wild that he wouldn't be the one going, what they're doing is wrong, I'm supposed to? So why? That could suggest quite a few things, sure. But it certainly stands out, doesn't it? Now, here is what the clip, let you listen to the clip, because it makes it very clear that Mike Johnson sent the letter and, why they would do this now.
The House will be in order. The chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., August 5th, 2025.
From Tel Aviv.
I hereby appoint the Honorable Mike Herodopoulos to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain. Pursuant to Clause 13 of Rule 1, the Journal of the Last Stage Proceedings is approved. The chair will lead the House in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pursuant to Clause 13 of Rule 1, the House stands adjourned until 11:30 a.m. on Friday, August 8, 2025.
2025 to the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Mike Rounds, a senator from the state of South Dakota, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Chuck Grassley, President pro tempore.
Isn't that weird? Both of them send these out to be done while no one's paying attention. Like, I mean, you tell me what you think. I mean, I'm not even sure I'm truly grasping like what this might really mean, other than what Thomas Massey's pointing out. Like, clearly the obvious, right? Like, they could be doing things to be stopping Trump from pointing, but something feels like there's more to this to me.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands adjourned until 1:05 p.m. on Friday, August 8th, 2025.
Now realize what you're only seeing kind of, the initiation of that, and then like the jump forward to like, the initiation or the end of it. The point though is that Massey, as we'll go back to, is I closed it already, is clearly suggesting that this was to stop Trump from making appointments during this period. So the fact that he's not screaming about that, it says something to me. Not that I even know what that means, but what that is something like whether I don't think any of them and what no media is talking about this. Like, it seems like nobody wants to see that going on. So I wanted to include that, especially with what we just talked about, with all the different overlaps, where it's going, the shifting of power. Something seems to be weird. Now, I talked about this, a few different things in yesterday's show. The title was Biotech Genomic Data Breach. That was Illumina. Maxwell Obama distractions and disaster relief exposes Israeli influence. So I want to give you a couple of quick updates to that I think you should not miss, the follow-up to yesterday, and wrap up here today. This is actually pretty wild to me. So we talked about it yesterday. It evolved to from the point that this was they first altered the page, and here's the page as it was before. Fiscal year 2025, DHS standard terms and conditions. So you realize the fact they deleted this is kind of insane. This is not just about that one point. There's tons of definitions and standard guidelines that are about all sorts of things, and this one part was about discrimination and funding. And so first, they added the part that said that you couldn't boycott or basically that discriminatory prohibited boycott means refusing to deal or working with specifically Israeli companies. All you had to say was with companies. I mean, any other country in the world, but it has to be only Israel or with companies doing business with Israel. And everybody, even largely conservatives, were outraged by that. Then they changed it. And I don't think I have that up right now. They altered it to go back to just saying some basic version that didn't include Israel. And I pointed it out yesterday. And then yesterday, it seemed that they added it back. I had the live version and it was right there. I'm thinking that's very clear, very weird. They would make this big point to delete it, and then somebody forced it back or somebody did it without them knowing. That's very interesting. And then they deleted it. In less than 24 hours, that page doesn't exist right now. Now, as usual, they could, if somebody really pushes them in a week, they'll go, oh, yeah, we just moved it over here. That nobody knows is there, right? Like, there's always a game. But that is interesting to me. So they've deleted the page that listed that. Now, again, this is not some small thing. This is a 12-page document about all sorts of different, just age discrimination, Americans with disabilities, and now it's gone. Obviously, because of what just happened, and I think it's showing how desperate they are. But I said, and now it appears the DHS has deleted the page. So they got caught, removed it, then added it back, and then removed it entirely. Desperation. Here is Salty Girl simply pointing out the point from before. The DHS is straight up lying and gaslighting. Remember, because they came out with this and said there's no FEMA requirement tied to Israeli money. And even they got fact checks saying, well, that's very dishonest because you clearly did it and then removed it and then posted this going, that's not true. And then added it back and then deleted the entire page over the process of the last 12 hours. How do you not see this for what it is? Oh, here we go. I forgot Mel posted this down here. Here's the first, the way it was. And then here's what they changed it to some point yesterday. Federal anti-discrimination law means federal civil rights that protect. That's what it should say in general. You don't have to make it about one or the other. That applies to all of them, doesn't it? But you see somebody out there who has influence over people in this position said it has to be about only Israel, and they complied. And she said, "Why are you lying?" So the DHS is .gov is lying about this. So I have this in the back in the show notes, so you could look to see what it said and that it's now gone. Let's refresh, though, see if it comes back. Nope, still gone. Very interesting. So on top of that, I don't know how I somehow missed this yet. I didn't miss it, but I think I read it and then didn't digest it. So yesterday, you probably laughed at me when you saw me read this, then looked around look for the part where it said literally what it says right up the top. Just to reiterate, though, you can laugh at me if you watch yesterday's show. It's right there. It says, after this circulated social media, and that's this point. It's exactly the same conversation about the post and not giving aid to people that boycott Israel. It says, after that circulated social media, the Department of Homeland Security had apparently decided to secretly violate the Federal Records Act by surreptitiously editing the file. Here, actually, I should show you this too. Check this out. Look at what it says right here. Now it says page not found, but they still brazenly lie to you by saying the last time it was updated was the 1st. Okay. It's the 6th today. Yesterday, we saw it change twice. And so they're trying to lie to you and say that they didn't, and the page is now gone, but yet it's been the same since the 1st. You realize how desperate this makes them look? They're caught, guys, and they're just deleting everything. That's desperation. My point, though, is to what he's saying is this is legal. This is a crime. They broke the law by altering this information and hiding that they changed it. But then he goes on to say the best part, they forgot to scrub the metadata, and then we talked about that yesterday. And so you can literally prove that they did change it, and they tried to hide that from you. And it's all right here. You break it all down. To be very, very clear, this is not unique to Trump and his administration. Your government's been doing this your whole life, the government. The point, though, is that it's very, very clear that this is getting worse by the moment. On top of that, less important because of how it just ended up so far today, but still really weird to me. This is from 404 Media. Constitution sections on due process and foreign gifts and habeas corpus, which I guess is due process, just vanished from Congress's website. It did. It's really crazy to me. So it says Congress's website for the U.S. Constitution, which is this page right here. You've seen it many times. We brought it up. Constitution anointed, and it goes through all the different parts. And as of right now, is complete. It says the website for the Constitution was changed to delete the last 2 sections of Article 1, which include provisions such as habeas corpus, forbidding the naming of titles of nobility, then forbidding foreign emoluments and U.S. officials, all 3 of which are super important to what we just talked about today and seem to be like the focus of what they're violating. And it just so happens to be what this glitch removes. I just think that's mathematically near impossible to believe, but certainly possible. The last full version of the webpage, which they archived, as well as the archive where the change was, we have for you. We'll show you next. The webpage maintained by the U.S. government hasn't changed significantly in the entire time it's been saved by the archive since 2019. That doesn't mean, that's just since the archive started. The point is, arguably, this thing's been the same for a really long time. The page for the Constitution on the National Archives website remains unchanged and shows the entire document. They removed this portion here. Everything from this point down was gone all day and from yesterday, all the way down to the bottom of section 1. All that was gone. All stuff we were generally highlighting already about, the writ of habeas corpus and all the important things that we see being violated by this current administration, but more accurately, your government for a very long time, but very clearly today in regard to immigration and plenty of others. As people in the Lemmy Forum conversation note, this could be a glitch, which is what they're claiming now, or some kind of error with the site. But considering the page doesn't include many dynamic elements, it's just text written out, and is mainly a text reprinting of the Constitution, a nearly 240-year-old document that hasn't changed since the addition of the 27th Amendment in 1992, and that the page itself is barely changed at all in the 6 years it's been archived, it's a noteworthy and sudden move. The point they're making, for those that understand the way this works, from back end of a website, if it's just text on a page, the idea that you could have a glitch that would delete one weird section seems nearly impossible to me. Not impossible, anything glitches are weird, but the point, though, is that it's not like there's some code that freaked out or some kind of, section that was an embed. It was text. You could argue that somebody just, bumped the keyboard and deleted it, which again, it just seems very, very unlikely. And why is it open to be deleted in the first place? Goes on to say the Trump administration does not have any control over the congressional websites, which is true, at least, on the surface. Today, those kind of things don't hold water for me because ultimately we know, and they've demonstrated they wanted to, they can pretty much do whatever they want. But it says the sudden disappearance of important parts of the Constitution is happening in the context of a broader government war on information. I mean, even just think of the symbolism behind this vanishing in exactly this time. I just think that's almost comical if it wasn't so alarming. Since the Trump administration took office, official federal government websites with public information have come under attack, being taken offline, entirely altered to reflect their values. Now it says habeas corpus, which is among the now deleted provisions, but now back on the Constitution webpage, allows people to challenge the imprisonment before a judge. In May, Homeland Security, NOM, said before a congressional committee that Trump can remove the constitutional provision of habeas corpus, calling it a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people. Embarrassingly, stupidly wrong, which I'll play for you right now because I think that's hilarious, but we'll come back to the rest.
And Trump.
Oop, wait, is it this one? Oh, I guess I forgot to download it. Or grab it entirely. Oh, I know what I did. It's right here. I forgot that I already had downloaded. So the reason this is so wild is that it's not just that she is incorrect about what the president can do. She literally doesn't understand what habeas corpus means. And that's evidenced by the fact that she continues forward and says, oh, Lincoln used it. So to be clear, Lincoln didn't use habeas corpus. He suspended habeas corpus, which at the time was actually unconstitutional until it was later ratified by Congress because it was, and he even apologized for it or, expressed that it was unconstitutional. So the point is that only Congress has that power to suspend habeas corpus only in two very specific situations, none of which are met by even their narratives. And she argued that it's the right of the president to use habeas corpus. Like, she just doesn't understand it. And that's what's so terrifying. And it just so happens to be the part that suddenly vanishes.
Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has
Wow.
to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right
let me stop you, ma'am.
suspend their
Habeas
right to.
corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
President
habeas
Lincoln
corpus,
used it.
See, her effort to try to act like just to demonstrate she still knows makes it even more clear that she doesn't know what she's talking about. And this is what I call the junior team, guys. All of them. These are people that are clearly out of their depth. And it's because, as others have argued, that people that are actually good at their jobs or actually have principles would never, ever be in that position today because of because Gabbard comes up and says something true and she gets ran through the mud because Trump doesn't care about the truth. Or rather, the government has never cared about the truth. So people with principles are like, yeah, right. I'm not going to get involved in that. And here's what we get left with. And then Israel steps in as well.
excuse me, habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires that the government provide a public reason for detaining and imprisoning people. If not for that protection, the government could simply arrest people, including American citizens, and hold them indefinitely for no reason. Habeas corpus is the foundational right that separates free societies like America from police states like North Korea. As a senator from the Live Free or Die state, this matters a lot to me and my constituents and to all Americans. So Secretary Noem, do you support the core protection that habeas corpus provides, that the government must provide a public reason in order to detain and imprison someone?
Yeah, I support habeas corpus. I also recognize that the president of the United States has the authority under the Constitution.
Incorrect. Like explicitly incorrect. If it's very clear that it's in the power of the U.S. Congress to make that decision, that's not even like a legitimate debate to be had. It's very clear, and that's what she says. Probably because that's what Trump said, or because what somebody argued, and she has no clue what she's talking about.
To decide if it should be suspended or not.
It has never
Let
been,
us be clear, though,
it
that
has
this
never
president,
been done. It has never been done without approval of Congress. Even Abraham Lincoln got retroactive approval from Congress.
Still blows me away. Now, the point here is this has been added back. You can see right here on the current section, it goes down to 10. And here is what. Oh, just shout out to True Stream Media, by the way, who also pointed this out and said, oh, weird, parts of Article 1 of the Constitution, specifically habeas corpus, just vanish. But they're working to correct it. That's what it said for a minute. Working to correct the issue. You can't just like copy and paste it back. Like, it's all it really is, guys. It's just very, very weird. Good on them for calling it out. Here, Rolling Stone says, quotes what they say. Due to a technical error, which again, I mean, I would love for them to explain how in the world a technical error can cause one specific section of text from a text post to just vanish. Due to a technical error, some sections of Article 1 were temporarily missing on the Constitution Anointed website. Apparently, one of the first times we've ever seen. This problem has been corrected, and the missing sections have been restored. Hooray for liberty. I mean, it just seems really strange. Now, last points. I'm going to play this clip, and we'll do a couple points on the way out. And this is about Epstein. You know, you're pretty much already abreast of what's going on. This I find interesting for far more than just about what's happening. You're about to hear Candace Owens say that we were fooled by Trump, which, by the way, shouldn't be a shock to anybody paying attention right now, but it's actually crazy that, I mean, Jones is still trying to drag this out like he always does into sort of like, yes, he's doing bad things, but we still love him and we're going to fight for him, but he might be the Antichrist. I mean, it's this whole little shtick. Candace is just, she comes out when his setup seems to try to make it sound like it's sort of not Trump's fault, but Candace comes out and goes, we were played. I thought Trump was something, I thought he was this, but he's not. That is going to be a massive shattering moment, guys. The fact that Candace Owens or people at that level with that many influence or supporters, it's going to change the conversation. And just recognize it's not just about Trump, guys. It's not about any of. They're just pieces in this play. This is about the U.S. government, about the Israeli government, and about the manipulation of our country. And so if you're unable to wrap your mind around that because you think it's only about Trump, then you need to pull back from that. This is much bigger than that. And they're finally either being forced to acknowledge it because it's too obvious, or they're finally seeing it. You can decide for yourself. Alex Jones frames this as President Trump says he was unaware of Ghislaine Maxwell's prison transfer. Who actually believes that? That's insane. And we'll read something about it, which people connected to his administration basically say that's just not true. And it's not normal, and it was very weird, and all the same stuff we've talked about.
And Trump states that he did not know that Ghislaine Maxwell was removed to club-fed minimum security prison at all. He defended the action, but said he was unaware of the move. How much does he know? He's
defended it, but then didn't know about it. Very Trump.
Also said that he doesn't know about any of these grand juries now finally convened on.
No, not as far as I can tell, by the way.
The Russiagate hoax coup. So here's this clip. I want you to, in closing, respond to this.
So you're telling me that Trump didn't even know about Russia? I mean, that just doesn't even line up with anything we're seeing. Trump has spoken about these things, but here he is going like, I don't know, what's that? Epstein? Who's that? You know, it's embarrassing, but they'll always toe the line, or at least Alex will very clearly try. But here's what Candace has to say after he reads this statement.
Questions for you. One, were you aware of and did you personally approve the prison transfer for Ghislaine Maxwell that your Justice Department?
I didn't know about it at all. No, I read about it just like you did.
And do you believe that she?
See, I was saying about that earlier. Isn't that embarrassing? Even if it's the truth, how embarrassing is that? You read about it? Like, so look, I'm not saying every single decision needs to involve the president, but you're going to tell me that you didn't even know about it until you were last in line. The media knew about this before you did. That's wildly embarrassing. And yet that shows me he's willing to make himself look bad in order to hide something.
It's not a very uncommon thing.
In fact, it seems to be very uncommon. We'll get into it in a second.
Do you believe that she's credible to be listening to her recently?
Well, let me tell you, he's a very talented man. His name is Todd Blanche. He's a very legitimate person, very high. I just a very highly thought of person, respected by everybody. And I didn't talk to him about it, but I will tell you that whatever he asked would be totally appropriate. And it's not an uncommon thing to do that.
So what's interesting is this is how it tends to go. But there are people in the past that he said exact glowing things like that about and then hates them 2 days later. You're right? Plenty of them. So my point is that when he does that, it's because he's trying to set the table, in my opinion, for whatever's about to come out from Todd Blanche. That he's smart and great and knows everything, and whatever he says next is going to be right. Gotcha. Marching orders. That's what I read it as. You can decide for yourself.
And I think he probably wants to make sure that, people that should not be involved or aren't involved are not hurt by something that would be very, very unfortunate, very unfair to a lot of people.
Right. So the continual argument that somebody, victims could be exposed. Okay, are they or not? Like, are you claiming that there are names that you're withholding because they're victims, or are you just continue to broadly state that anything we don't show you is probably under that umbrella? Doesn't that matter?
And now, Ghislaine Maxwell told DOJ Trump never did anything concerning anything around her.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second too, right? So that's new. That's as of late yesterday, today. The point is, the weird flip. In fact, I'll just quickly show you Orwell's tweet. Simply says how it's all going down. Donald and Jeffrey were joined at the hip. There's never a pervy party that Donald missed. Maxwell is, kind of framing the past conversations. And then Trump, clemency, pardon, immunity, whatever that happened behind the scenes. And now that I think about it, he's never been involved with that. I mean, it's even conservatives going like, come on, like it's a weird series of events. You meet her, you give her a box of materials. She claims they sings on 100 people, Jones reports, and all the rest. And then nothing happens. And yet now she's going, nothing, Trump wasn't involved and they don't want her to testify. It's all drifting into the background and starts to feel that way. And weirdly, that's been my opinion about where it seems to be going this entire time. Now, Candace Owens is going to tell you the exact same thing.
People are saying this doesn't look too good, Candace, but I never saw any evidence of Trump as she's saying. So why red carpet her? Because somebody in his orbit is connected.
Okay, so just as clear, even the last statement he made was seriously trying to downplay, no evidence. I mean, come on. I'm not claiming there's evidence of him raping kids, but very clearly there's a mountain of evidence that he's very close, including that Epstein called him one of his closest friends for 10 years. You won't hear that from him. Or the fact, or the overarching point that he was pictured with him many times. He was on the plane many times, whether or not he went to the island. That's all evidence about this whole point. So it just seems like a really desperate effort to, but here's what Candace Owens says, and it really does align with, what I think is the honest perspective of this personally.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. It feels like they went in there and, will you agree to say this, say that? We'll move you to a nice cushy prison, so you can live out the rest of your sentence. He's going to pardon her, by the way. That's coming down the pipeline.
That didn't seem to be at all what Jones just framed it as, by the way. But maybe I'm missing what he said. Seems like he tried to go the other way and she pulled it back to Trump's probably guilty. Seems like that was interesting to me, but I agree with what you're saying.
And like I said, it's just sad to see this. It genuinely makes me sad because I devoted so many years to getting out there and campaigning for Trump. I truly believed him. And I just feel like the scales are falling off of my eyes here. And I'm just realizing there is no entity that has more power than the Israel lobby in America and all around the world, by the way. France is fighting this too. People locked up for anti-Semitism for telling the truth. Like, you can literally go to prison if you tell the truth, if it points to a larger conspiracy about who has control. So it's not just America that's fighting this. But I don't know. We have to look towards the future. People that are willing to stand up to this are the people that should be platformed. And I think in the future, it will become a litmus test.
Yeah. Right. Funny how that, this is the effort to make I'm sitting here while she says that. So therefore I'm on. No, you are the like what she's showing you is exactly what is being exposed through things like what Alex are doing. The litmus test very clearly. And she says, if you are not seeing this, if you're not calling it out, he's not. He's giving you lip service about overlapping points that have been transparent for decades, but not really the understanding of what the evidence is pointing to or what Trump is lying to you about. All the efforts to cover it up. He went over weeks telling you that it was a hoax. Day after day that it's a Democrat hoax and Russia, or they lied about it and Obama lied to everybody, which he did. But now it's weird how that's not the topic anymore. Is it a hoax still or is it not? Does the list exist? You just got to start being honest about how dishonest these people are, guys. And I think it's very obvious right now who's trying to grapple with all of it. Now, David Icke says about that clip, they said, because the point was Jones, as he does, post like the same thing 17 different times and captions it differently. He says, Alex Jones, talking about himself, holds the position that we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, should fight to get Trump back on course. You see my point? The idea that we still have hope that Trump is good. That's not what Candace is saying, okay? She's saying, I see through it now. It's just sad, this desperate hang on to the team. That's the gravy train, though. So David Icke says he is on course, Trump. The course that David said he was on since he came on the political scene in 2016, but which neither of them, in his point, could see when those paying attention and not blinded by partisan politics saw it as obvious. Yes, 100% the point. Now, include these for you. Maxwell told DOJ Trump never did anything concerning around her. Just feels really ridiculous to me. During her 9 hours speaking with Todd Blanche, really great guy, really knows what he's saying, whatever he says next is going to be true. Ghislaine Maxwell said nothing during the interview that would be harmful to President Trump, telling Blanche that Trump had never done anything in her presence that would have said. So why didn't that come out immediately? That wasn't like the first thing. Funny how this has been like the coordinated conversation, which is kind of where this is going. Clearly, we can't prove that. Now, what they go on to say is that is considering publicly releasing the transcripts. but most likely not the audio. That certainly speaks for itself. Transcripts can be printed out and altered. Audio can be altered, but it's much more difficult to get away with today because of all the, they got caught altering the video in the Epstein file, or the Epstein, when he was in prison. It's so funny how many examples we keep seeing of them getting blatantly caught, desperately trying to deceive you, and then we just move forward, or the Team Sport Politics moves forward. But it says there's also an audio recording of the interview. Sources said it's not clear whether they're going to plan to release that. The public release of the transcript could come soon as this week. Okay, so it's going to be text on a piece of paper. Why would we ever take that at face value right now? Maxwell's lawyer said following her meetings with Blanche, they would welcome any relief, and said that Maxine was asked about 100 different people. That's the quote they keep swinging around. Now, are they 100 Democrats that they just wanted to frame in this problem? Are they 100 people that she knew were guilty? Maxwell was asked about 100 people. You get from the Jones and the rest that she sung at 100 people and is all coming down. Well, that's not what that says. That's not even what they gave her a box. And clearly, I think we're setting this up. That's how it feels to me. And that's even what it seems Candace is getting at now. Trump asked Tuesday whether he approved the prison transfer, and he said, I didn't know about it, which is embarrassing. Okay. So here, and this is just interesting enough, the first framing of this in this article, which is telling about even corporate media. Maxwell told DOJ Trump never did anything concerning around her. That's exactly what she says. I'd argue this is the best framing from the corporate media. More accurate, I should say. Then here's independent. Just like Maxwell told Justice Department she never saw Trump do anything concerning with Epstein. Very different thing to say, isn't it? Actually not the accurate statement. So why is the independent almost trying to help Donald Trump, or at least reporting it inaccurately to his benefit? But it says Suzanne Maxwell said she never saw Trump do anything that would cause concern. Also a very different statement than either of the other two. What was said is that she never saw around him do anything inappropriate, which seems really hard to believe with even his past examples. But what she's insinuated and others have insinuated, or even victims of Epstein have accused Trump of crimes. So Raw Story reports, just not plausible. Donald Trump's Maxwell excuse gets brutal fact check from stunned expert. It says a fact check, a lawyer responded, fact check one of Trump's more outlandish claims. Trump was asked by CNN whether he knew of or approved Jeffrey Epstein's compliance, the transfer to the minimum security prison. Trump denied both and claimed that he learned about it from the news. Trump added it was not uncommon. The last claim stunned that it was uncommon, or not uncommon. The last claim stunned Ryan Goodman, who's a former special counsel of the Department of Defense and a lawyer a law professor at NYU. He corrected Trump on an interview. He said, this had to be approved by someone very senior at the Bureau of Prisons, which, by the way, again, was the one that transferred her, not the marshals, which is also abnormal. But it says it's so unusual. He says, look, President Trump should have just said, we're dealing with an unusual situation, so something unusual happened. That would be one way of approaching it. Instead, he comes out and goes, no big deal, no, nothing different at all, when you can look and go, yeah, it is unusual, so why do you lie about that? What he said is not plausible, Goodman continued, and it's so unusual that you would hope the Justice Department would have informed him that he would not learn about it in the news. I don't believe that. I think that's insane to argue. Quote, it's such an extraordinary step taken with very high-profile convict. Lastly, Trump aides plan to plead with Joe Rogan to end the Epstein crisis. I think they're desperate right now. Senior Trump administration, leaders are reportedly looking at using megastar Joe Rogan to help tackle lingering fallout from the Jeffrey Epstein crisis. What's weird about this is not even the way that's just being framed. What they're saying makes it very clear they're like in managed damage control right now. It says Vice President J.D. Vance is set to host a dinner with his residence on Wednesday evening to hash out the Trump administration's next move on the Maxwell audio transcript. Doesn't that seem weird in and of itself? Okay, if this is about the truth, and we're not talking about redacting. They're meeting at their dinner party to discuss what they're doing with this stuff. Why would that make sense to anybody? Release it. If you've already redacted and done what you've done, release it. The fact that you have to meet and discuss the way to plan this out right shows me that there's coordination about how they want this to roll out. That's dishonesty. The gathering will include Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, of course, people call the handler of Trump, all of which have very clear connections to Israel, Attorney General Pam Bondi also, and Kash Patel also, according to 3 sources familiar with the plan. So you get the core team here, the crew, right? Kash, Bongino, Wiles, Bondi, and now Todd Blanche. To me, that is like the team that's been gaslighting you around most of these things, all of which are blindly supporting Israel. All of them. Like Bongino said, the one thing close to his heart is Israel. I mean, you just can't hide this stuff. According to CNN, the Department of Justice has been working to digitize, transcript, and redact over 10 hours of audio. That's what they were doing. The meeting will attempt to craft a, quote, unified response to the handling of the Epstein case. They're trying to handle you guys. They're trying to corral you. They're trying to manage you. It says 2 sources told the network that all but Vance are the core players shaping the administration's ongoing strategy regarding Epstein files. Why do you need an ongoing strategy to release the truth? Among the options under discussion is a media blitz led by Blanche. Because Trump's already set the table. Whatever he says is going to be right. That's what they're not. They know what they're doing. It's very obvious if you pay attention. 3 people familiar with the internal talks told CNN that aides have floated a press conference or a podcast appearance with Rogan. That's propaganda, guys. Who endorsed Trump in the 2024 election, but has actually criticized him around the Epstein case in particular. Officials in the Trump administration determined that Epstein's death was a suicide. They just add that. Don't forget that. We all know that's not true. And Kash and Bongino sat there and deadpan told you for sure. Even though they were making the rounds about how it was all going to come out and it was all Democrats, and then never mind. Not true. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're cowards. You're weaklings. The Trump administration in February declassified and released files related to Epstein, but they were highly redacted and did not offer any more revelations. Again, they hoped that was enough. They waited to how you responded, and then when you said that's nothing, they went, oh, wait, it's all on my desk. I've got truckloads coming in, and then nothing happened. And then they told you the files were a hoax. Guys, you just can't. It's comical how this has been going if it wasn't so serious. A July memo from the DOJ and FBI said no additional material would be released. The 2 officials said the material from the interview could be released as early as this week. We already told you that. One of the internal debates centers on whether releasing the interview could reignite the Epstein scandal, something which some officials close to Trump believe has largely died down. Right, so that's about the truth? Or even if it is the truth, considering not releasing that truth because it benefits us. But we're honest, though. It's all about information, right? You just can't ignore this stuff. It's right on the surface. They don't care about the truth, even if you think it's secondary. Number one is their agenda, is their influence, their control. No different than either side. And again, Orwell lays it out very clearly here. That to me, it seems obvious that this is about, that something has shifted. Let's put it that way to be objective. And everyone's calling it out, guys, other than the obvious. Now, lastly, to kind of bring this back around, which we'll talk about in a coming up show, but tying it all together in an interesting way. This is an exclusive that came out August 1st. How Kareem Khan at the ICC, how his Israel war crimes probe was derailed by threats, leaks, and sex claims. Doesn't that certainly sound familiar? It's exactly what we're talking about, guys. Suddenly, there's a big case with all sorts of evidence about how they're committing war crimes. And what do you know? A sex allegation is spun up around this guy. Now, it could be that it was made up, could be that it was real. Either way, where do you think that came from? It's exactly what we're highlighting here. What do you think they have on people in the administration? What do you think they have in Biden's administration? This. That's what I think. I think it's pretty obvious to prove. It is a network. It's Epstein. Well, the Epstein was one part of it. It was a network that they're still utilizing to influence power structures. And I'll include this one for you as well. David Icke and I had a great interview about this. And he's really one of the people that opened my eyes to the kind of Sabbateanism side of this whole thing. But it's called Zionism Infiltration of Judaism, Weaponized Migration, and Mainstream Alternative Media. The point is that he discusses Sabbateanism as a kind of foundational element of 3 things: communism, Nazism, and Zionism. And what is the core point? Infiltration of religions and governments. It's all right there for us. It's all right there. And the point, guys, is I think that's very clearly what's going on in this country, in this government, and everywhere else dealing with this right now. I think it's very clear. All I'm hoping is that you're out there listening and willing to consider the information. And then hopefully take one more step and look at the source material and read it for yourself. And then take a step back and consider whether I might be wrong. Consider whether I missed something and then share that with me. And then we could talk about it the next time, or have discussions with your friends and your family and sit down and have a TLAV Tuesday or whatever, like we do on AMA and discuss what we talks about. You have to sit there and watch the show, print out the material, have the talking points written down and be like, this is what we talked about, or anybody else for that matter. Let's discuss this amicably. We can disagree, but let's debate and discuss and find. That's what they're afraid of, guys. An educated, informed electorate. Please stand up. Start calling this stuff out. Thank you for being here today. I don't believe I'm going to get to a show tomorrow. I will if I have time, but I've got 2 different interviews I'm doing tomorrow. I've got a lot of good interviews coming up. I'm going to be talking with James Corbett about the whole Give WP thing to get, more of his perspective on it and really make sure people see that. We talked about it in 2 different shows. I shared you his article about it. It seems to have been corrected, but nonetheless, it's worth discussing. Not just that it happened, but how little coverage it got in any context. But I'm going to be having Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com coming up soon. Who else was it? There's a few more coming. I'm on with Germ Warfare tomorrow morning. I have Jimmy Dore on, I believe, tomorrow night. Those might not come out tomorrow, but plenty coming your way. And again, in case you missed the previous notes, I'm going to be doing the Monday podcast with called Fine Points with BitChute going forward. And I really enjoy the conversation. You watch it. We disagree on plenty of stuff. And I value that from BitChute in particular. But the conversation primarily about constitutional rights, about the issues in that one vein, but plenty of others that continue to go forward. So thank you for your support for this platform. Thank you for standing up for the truth. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.